Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3.
Good morning and welcome to the Committee of the Whole Town of Qualicum Beach meeting. First, I want to acknowledge that we are holding this meeting on the traditional territory of the Coast Salish people, in particular Qualicum First Nation. And so we have the agenda, but I need to ask for an amendment, and that is on budget and under 2, the housekeeping issues, which is what you received on the green sheet. And I'll ask staff to read that out so everybody will know. Any other changes to the agenda? Then the agenda is adopted by consent. There are no minutes, so we'll proceed with the budget. Mr. Hare.
Thank you, Your Worship. So today's session is public engagement session number 2, and the directors will be presenting on each service area that they're responsible for in today's presentation, and following that we will be discussing the water and sewer capital budgets, which we didn't get to on November 20th. And then for the benefit of those council members who were not here and members of the public who couldn't make it to the last meeting, we'll be doing a recap of the 2025 operating budget pressures in the 2025 general capital plan. And just also wanted to point out, Your Worship,
It's okay.
Yeah, I just want to ask council to take a note of the page that you may have a question about, and then after the complete presentation, we can ask those questions. Thank you. Okay. Please proceed.
Before carrying on, Your Worship, I was just going to also mention that today we are not asking the Committee of the Whole for any direction with respect to the budget. It's an information session. We will be coming back to Council on December the 11th to seek direction on the financial plan after the Committee of the Whole and Council has a chance to absorb all of the information. Thank you, Your Worship. And we're going to start with a presentation from the CAO.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Director Hare. So the Office of the CAO is comprised of myself, an executive assistant who also serves council. The budget for this department also provides remuneration for council, conference attendance, and professional development. The budget for this department is $723,300, and you can see that on page 35 of the condensed budget book. Council attends UBCM annually, which rotates between Vancouver, Victoria, and Whistler. They also attend 2 FCMs, which is held in multiple locations across Canada, as well as AVICC and a number of other conferences. So that's what this department budget is comprised of. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Ms. Varela. Mr. Hare.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm just going to go back a slide. I kind of skipped over a slide here. So we do have attached to the agenda package and handed out to members of the public a draft copy of the interim condensed budget book. So this is a condensed version of what you saw last year of the financial plan. And the book is subject to adjustments for strategic initiatives and capital and operating items. And it may contain spelling and grammatical and other minor errors, which will be addressed in the final publication, which will accompany the financial plan bylaw. The visuals in the document are also subject to change. So the complete version, as I mentioned earlier, will be presented along with the first and second readings of the draft bylaw on January 22nd. And with that, we'll turn it over to our Director of Corporate Services.
Ms. Svensson.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. So my presentation is outlined on pages 36 to 39 of the budget book. The corporate services team provides administrative services to council, the organization, and the public, and we're responsible for a basket of duties, including supporting council and committees, managing corporate records, freedom of information requests, administration and leases, grants. We have communications under our portfolio, which includes website maintenance, managing and overseeing special events, risk management, and insurance. We're proud that Qualicum Beach supports so many wonderful special events, and you'll see on the slide that there'll be 22 special events which are managed and supported by corporate services for 2025 coming up. The Corporate Services Department is led by myself and comprised of my Deputy Corporate Administrator, Danielle, and we have 1 admin assistant and 4 full-time office assistants. We provide support on a shared basis to all departments within the town, and I'd like to publicly thank my staff because they do an amazing job and don't often get publicly recognized. They work really hard and shift gears whenever possible, so I'd like to take the opportunity to thank the staff. Plans for 2025 include continued work with the communications strategy implementation, which is led by Council's strategic initiatives, and it includes for 2025 the visual identity refresh and launching of our new website, which we're very excited will be happening in Q1 of 2025. We'll be working on records management, we'll be doing a comprehensive policy review, and we'll be maintaining service level standards for our meetings and communications. The annual budget for the department is anticipated to increase by 2%, and that is due to annual wage and benefit increases and an increase to the town's insurance premiums. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Svensson. Mr. Hare.
We also have, thank you, Your Worship. We also have a slide of community partnership and events just for council. Sorry about that. Thank you. We also have a slide here that includes all of the events that our Corporate Services Department assists in supporting that are put on during the year, just again for the public and council's information. And then turn it over to our Director of HR.
Good morning, Your Worship. Thank you for the opportunity to present HR department budget. Our department is supporting all departments within the whole organization, and we focus on 5 core service areas, and these are recruitment, selection and retention, employee and labor relations, occupational health and safety, employee training, development and well-being, and employee recognition and engagement. Thank you. So looking ahead, we have identified 4 key priorities that will shape our efforts in 2025. The first one is QP collective bargaining negotiations. Our collective agreement is expiring in June 2025. And upcoming QP collective bargaining negotiations will require significant time and resources to secure a new agreement. The second priority is succession planning program. The town is preparing for an unprecedented wave of retirements, with 49% of our staff possibly eligible for retirement, excuse me, in the next 5 years. The third priority is focusing on safety culture and injury prevention. We will aim to improve workplace safety practices, focus on return to work program, injury prevention, and we will foster safety culture. It is especially important because our WorkSafe BC rates have increased significantly over the last few years. And the fourth priority we have identified is recruitment and selection. Recruitment activity is at all-time high. This year we posted for 30 positions, and we anticipate similar levels of openings next year. Managing these processes requires a substantial allocation of time and resources as well. So our proposed budget for 2025 is $607,000. This includes funding for 3 positions in our department, 2 permanent full-time roles, including the conversion of health and safety coordinator from temporary to permanent full-time, and that is contributing to an increase of $136,000. And the third position is one 2-year term position of HR specialist to support our growing demands. Additionally, the budget includes provisions for training and development, because we are managing training and development for the entire organization, recruitment activities to manage the record number of postings, and bargaining-related contracting expenses to support the upcoming negotiations. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Hare.
Thank you, Your Worship. So the financial team is responsible for overall management of the financial affairs of the municipality, and is responsible for the accounting and audit services, and for for overseeing the annual expenses and revenues of the organization. The team is comprised of 5 members who oversee and coordinate financial planning and reporting, including the development of the financial plan, the 5-year financial plan bylaw, and quarterly reporting and year-end financial statements. The department also provides support to the rest of the municipal departments with financial analysis, and is also responsible for processing the organization's accounts payables, payroll, accounts receivable, property tax administration, including downloading BC assessment information, generating tax notices, and tax collection. And in addition to our ongoing responsibilities, plans for 2025 include building on and implementing the asset management financing strategy, and developing a new purchasing policy to reflect modern procurement practices, address risks, and ensure appropriate controls and authorizations are in place. The expenditure budget for the department includes wages and benefits for a staff of 5, contracted audit fee services, and professional development, and is $684,000 per year. In terms of our information technology department, our IT team is comprised of a 3-member team who ensure that networks, IT infrastructure, and information systems remain secure and effective. The team also manages information systems and database systems, and develops and implements innovative technological solutions. Recent examples include the award-winning public inquiry system, which was developed internally, and the development tracker application, which Council will see in January, which has also been developed internally as well. Plans for 2025 include enhancing GIS-powered applications to meet staff needs and improve efficiency, and also meet public needs. Continued compliance with Microsoft 365 and digital record security. To introduce automation-driven solutions to enhance operational performance and replace end-of-network and IT devices, and support departments with their technology needs. The IT expenditure budget is comprised of wages and benefits for the team of 3, professional development provisions, software licensing costs, hardware, and evergreening, and a contract for services for managed IT support. The annual budget for the IT department is $986,000 per year, found on page 43 of the budget book. And with that, Your Worship, I will also speak at a very high level to police services. So police services are provided through the Oceanside Detachment of the RCMP. The detachment is equipped with a modern police station with front counter staff. In addition to providing 24-hour frontline policing, the detachment has a general investigation unit, a municipal traffic unit, and a domestic violence officer and social liaison. Police services are provided through a contract for police services through the province, and resources allocated to Qualicum Beach are comprised of 8 members, prorated public servant support, facility accommodation costs, and prorated guard and maintenance costs. The 2025 contract for police services is budgeted at $1.6 million and increases by 8% over the previous year, primarily due to compensation increases in member and civilian compensation. And Your Worship, I will turn it over to our fire chief.
Thank you. The Fire Rescue Department provides fire prevention, fire suppression, medical care, and rescue services excuse me, to the town of Qualicum Beach and properties in Area G of the RDN. The department is a member of automatic and mutual aid agreements, which provide additional apparatus and firefighters for large-scale incidents. The fire department received Superior Tender Shuttle accreditation in 2021, which can provide significant insurance savings for residents in non-hydro-protected areas. The department is staffed by a fire chief, deputy fire chief, 2 fire inspectors, an emergency vehicle technician, and a part-time administrative assistant. All these positions are dedicated to supporting the 30 paid-on-call firefighters who protect the community. Qualicum Beach Fire Rescue is on track to respond to 330 incidents in 2024, slightly up from previous years. Call volume for 2025 is forecast to be similar to 2024. Some of our 2024 highlights included training 5 new recruits to exterior operations level, graduating the 2022 recruit class with NFPA 1001 professional firefighter certifications, increasing community outreach and recruitment with regular attendance at weekly markets and public events, building a succession and professional development plan for staff and paid-on-call firefighters, developing a community wildfire resiliency plan with field management plans, and creating an online members page for resources and member engagement. Our 2024 challenges included maintaining and increasing the number of paid-on-call firefighters and balancing their fire service duties with work-life responsibilities. Plans for 2025 are to continue with the review and revision of our operations and training sections of our operational guidelines and policies, review the new BC Fire Safety Act to ensure compliance, increase Fire Smart outreach at public events and through Fire Smart assessments, review the Community Wildfire Resiliency Plan and implement the recommendations, complete research for a new tender apparatus to maintain Superior Tender Shuttle rating, facilitating a youth fire camp for high school students, which was first started in 2024, and certifying members as emergency vehicle operators. The fire rescue operating budget covers training, equipment purchase and maintenance, staff wages, paid-on-call firefighter remuneration and retention initiatives. The operating budget is forecast to increase to $1.6 million in 2025 due to increased equipment costs, the addition of a Fire Smart and Wildfire Resiliency Coordinator, and to provide paid-on-call firefighters with extended health benefits. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Mr. Hare.
Thank you, Your Worship. Over to our Director of Planning and Community Development. Planning.
Thank you very much. The Planning and Community Development team provides a wide array of services in the areas of community planning, economic development, development application reviews, subdivision, zoning, building permits, building inspections, and emergency planning. In addition to that, we manage the building permits and development approvals process and advise council on sustainability initiatives, growth management, economic development, and bylaw development. Behind the scenes, our team also does business licensing, sign permits, municipal addressing, and other related services. So the overall scope of services, a lot of them come before the council table frequently in the realms of policy development or bylaws, but as noted, there are lots of things that happen behind the scenes to keep things going. I do want to highlight the overall budget for the town of Qualicum Beach Planning and Development Services planning and community development and emergency planning, is a total of $774,500. There's a proposed increase in the service area of bylaw compliance, bylaw enforcement, and that is a request to increase the number of bylaw officers from 1 to 2. This is important in the long term as we're looking for business continuity. This is a department of 1 at the moment, so there's only 1 bylaw officer, and to ensure that if he were to depart the organization or have an extended absence from his job, we would not have a bylaw officer. So adding a second bylaw officer would add resilience to that, so that is a consideration for council today. It would also allow the department to respond to many of the service area increases that people have been requesting. So extended hours, for example, or service on weekends. So as noted, the projected increase is a total of $63,700, and that is predominantly because of that request for a second bylaw officer. And I do want to look forward to next year and just highlight some of the major projects on the go. So as council and many members of the public are aware, we are undertaking a review of the town's official community plan with a focus on housing. We're undertaking a grant-funded project entitled the Pathways to Sustainable Development. That's a long-term economic development strategy. We are undertaking the tree bylaw review, which is a direction from council previously. Sotlam Park plan, that is proceeding with implementation in its first phase, and I do have a slide about that immediately following this one. We're continuing with the bus garage site implementation. There is some budget allocated for that for next year. And we will proceed with the project that was initiated by a member of council. The full title is Ways to Achieve Market Affordable Housing. It's just noted on the slide as affordable market housing, but that is the same initiative, and it complements the official community plan review with a focus on housing. Next slide. I do want to put this up on the screen just because the Sotlam Park plan implementation in particular, there's many facets to it. So council and members of the public may be wondering what would possibly be happening next year with the budget and what would be happening in years following. So there is an allocation of $250,000 in the budget for next year, and the majority of that funding would go towards the washroom contribution, which is going to be a part of the lodge restoration project. So that will take up the majority of the budget allocation for next year. There will likely be opportunity to undertake some of the other minor parts of that plan next year. So for example, some of the underground works and things that we've already gone through the archaeological review process for. So minor expenditures, but the majority would be the washroom improvement. The following year, we would be proceeding with other elements in the overall plan, such as the play area, which is the little purple blob on the screen up there. You can't read it, but of course the plan is online for everyone to review. So with that, I'll hand it back to Director Hare. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. And next section is going to be operations, and our Director of Infrastructure Services will be speaking to that, and I'll hand over the clicker because he's got quite a few slides, so he can go at his own speed.
I'm in control. This is excellent. The Operations Department is responsible for the operation, maintenance, and construction of all the town's physical assets. Everything including the kitchen sink. And at last count, we had 9 of those. All of these assets, roads, parks, water system, sanitary, and storm, are worth more than $300 million. That is all of our assets. That is a significant amount of assets to be managing. I will now briefly go through each of those sub-departments in our operations. Our first department I'll talk about is our Transportation Department, which is responsible for those roads and sidewalks and signs and lines that we paint everywhere, as well as lights and traffic controls. And in 2025, at the bottom of the slide, as you'll see, we will be updating the Community Transportation Plan, which we will be doing more frequently now after COVID. And we will be now at this time considering priorities based on public feedback, as we always do with this update, and incorporating the data from speed monitoring and accident data that we receive from ICBC. So this helps us every time we review this to revisit our priorities, because sometimes you'll see more accidents in one location and that might make that a higher priority, or public feedback may be calling for one of the projects to be higher on the list, and then we have an opportunity on these updates to reconsider those priorities. We'll also be incorporating accessibility improvements into our capital planning with support from the accessibility team. So we do this through current systems as well as through our community transportation plan, but with that accessibility team, it'll just give us a better focus and ability to prioritize those projects as well. The next department is our drainage department. Oh, I forgot. The transportation department, I'll just be summarizing, and drainage is $2.95 million is the total budget for that. Our drainage department in the town is a combination of natural creeks, ponds, pipes, culverts, and ditches. And this is one of our assets that has functioned very well for us with as much and as little tender love and care as we've put into it in the past. But what we are seeing is historically we are in a very sandy area in much of our town. And so we've relied on extensive infiltration into those sandy soils to dispose of that stormwater. Now what we're seeing with development and with application of sands on our roads and just wear and tear of any municipality, we're seeing those soils clog up with fine materials. And what this is causing is flooding in areas that we have not seen in the past. And we're seeing this more and more, and this is compounded by, as we're seeing, is more intense storms. This is also compounded by illegal ditching and filling, which has been happening extensively through the town, and is further complicated by Bill 44, which is providing density in areas we hadn't anticipated. All of this is necessitating a master drainage plan, which we're planning for 2025, which will identify all these constraints and opportunities and prioritize improvements while also identifying the cost of growth so that development, as it continues to happen, will be able to pay for its fair share of all these improvements. An example of this is a recent project we've started looking at is on Canyon Crescent, where one of the residents had their property start flooding, and it hasn't in the past. And so we looked at that, and from the ditch infilling where people just put a culvert in without hiring an engineer, talking to the town, we have culverts going in the wrong direction towards each other. So it doesn't flow downhill, they flow towards each other, and there's 5 culverts in varying locations that don't help the drainage. And so this has just happened over decades, and because of the sandy soils, hasn't been an issue, but now those sandy soils aren't draining, so now we have flooding. So this is just one example of dozens that we will see in the municipality. So we're putting a lens to that with the master drainage plan so we can identify them, prioritize them, and then start talking to council about budgeting to improve these, and in many instances in partnership with those adjacent properties. Next on our list is parks, and our parks department is just recently we had a park service review in 2024 completed in partnership with a third party to measure what services we provide and to what level and what resources are required to provide those services, and we've recently provided that to council. With the implementation of this service review in 2025, we will be focusing on deferred maintenance, things that we just haven't been able to keep up to in the last couple of years, and utilizing improved methods at tracking the what work we do and where. This is basically how we have our works request system now, our inquiry system, as well as how we do our timesheets to make sure it's more transparent and easier to figure out what we're doing and why we're doing it. The Parks Department also will have additional increased services that council will be considering through the budget process, such as Satlam Park and implementing our 2024 Wildlife Resiliency Plan. Our Parks Department has a budget of $1.7 million. Next up is our facilities, or buildings and facilities department. The town owns over 60 facilities, many of which also have kitchen sinks. Luckily, many of those we do not maintain. We only maintain the ones that are public property or used by the municipality. As we have our, basically of those 60 properties, we have them classified, as you can see on the screen, in 3 different types. And so the town maintained facilities, we take care of those kitchen sinks. The market rate leases are properties such as MKM or Qualicana, that we lease to a business, and they are fully responsible for all that maintenance inside. There are instances where we do maintain or we're responsible for roofs or structures or servicing, but generally it's a hands-off scenario for us, which is good for our staff. And the last on there is nominal rent leases to societies, where we have different leases for different societies where we really try to work with each society on what their capacity is or abilities are. And some examples are the museum or the lawn bowling and curling club, where we will take care of certain aspects, but for the most part, they are responsible for the operation and maintenance of their facility. For 2025, we are continuing to implement our 2022 Altus Group report, which I believe over the last few years, Council has been talked with about that, where the Altus Group report looked at all of these properties and made recommendations on a very high level about how much we should be investing in those, and identified issues such as roof repairs that are forthcoming, gutters, structural issues, those types of things. And so we have a budget every year they've defined for us over the next 10, 15 years that we're refining and looking at with a finer tooth comb to bring those every year back to council. Just some of those priorities change, some of them obviously have become more expensive, and some we're able to actually repair quickly and easily without being a big capital project. Our facilities budget for 2025 is going to be $847,000 approximately. Next up is our airport. I'll just defer to our airport manager, Kevin Goldfuss, here to speak to that briefly, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Our airport, Qualicum Beach Airport, Cat 4, is a certified airport with Transport Canada. The runway is approximately 3,500 feet by 75 feet wide. It has 6 taxiways, 1 apron, and it is a fully serviced airport. Services at the Qualicum Beach Airport, we have full fuel services, which is Jet A and Avgas. We have paved runways, as I've indicated. It is a transportation gateway to the Lower Mainland. It offers services for BC ambulances, such as medevacs. We have one commercial air carrier, and we have multiple leaseholders, and we provide helicopter training. Plans for 2025 would be the investigation of viability and process of expanding the Qualicum Beach Airport Authority noise-sensitive area map, and it will also include a review of the airport current bylaw for fees and charges. So our proposed budget for 2025 is $1,240,000. Part of that is a $130,000 one-time expenditure, which will be for tree management on the approach to runway 29.
All good? Yep. Excellent. Thank you. I'll continue on with the last two sub-departments in our operations department, which is the water and sewer. The water is basically full provision service that we do, from raw water protection and extraction from our 2 well fields in Berwick and Little Qualicum River, to treatment and then distribution to our 4,561 connections. In 2025, we plan on completing a master water plan to incorporate asset management with our water model, identifying constraints in the system, and layer on future demands of development, such as those that we'll see from Bill 44. This will ensure an equitable sharing of the cost to maintain and upgrade our water system. With a capital project manager as well, we are now able to implement more consistently our asbestos cement water main replacement program to a level that we need to maintain our system. And the deadline for that, from an engineering perspective, is we have several coupons. You take coupons out of the side of the pipe that tells you basically what's the life expectancy of these pipes. And many of them that we've taken coupons out of is about 15 years. So we're right now looking at different parts of the community where the AC pipe is, to look at where the worst condition pipe is and focus on those. So in the next couple of years, you'll see us doing AC water main in different parts of the community. And as we really focus on where the worst pipe is, then we'll start doing a lot more water main replacement in those areas. Our water budget is $3.2 million for 2025. Our sewer department is also responsible for just over 3,900 connections. It's actually 4,561 connections. The town collects sewer throughout the town, and we convey it to the RDN offshore main that is just off our beautiful beach, and it then flows to the French Creek treatment plant. So our budget of $1 million every year is basically to maintain our collection system, and then there's a separate budget where we pay the RDN for treatment of our wastewater. It is estimated that about 25% of our sanitary sewer from our system is actually stormwater, which is supposed to be going into our creeks and back to our ocean. So we pay that premium to the RDN to treat that water. So we are going to start a trunk main metering program to identify the neighborhoods or areas where we have high groundwater table, or there are roof drains basically plugged right into our sewer system, so we can disconnect those and put in better stormwater system, redirect those to our creeks, which also help our fish, and save us approximately 25% of our budget once we are able to implement this. So that's one of our big programs for that year. In summary, our department budget is $9.7 million, and I'll hand it back to Mr. Hare.
Thank you, Rob. Your Worship, before moving on to water capital, I'd just like to remind Council and Committee of the Whole that there will be a meeting on December the 4th of the Committee of the Whole, an airport information meeting. So in terms of water and sewer capital, this slide is difficult to read, but for those of you who have the agenda packages, it is on page 62 of the condensed budget book. And the water capital plan is primarily ranges from about $945,000 a year to $2 million a year in years 2025 to 29. And the capital expenditures are primarily represented by the replacement of end-of-life water main to reduce the risk of breaks and interruption to services. And I believe Rob spoke to that in the water operations presentation as well. And capital expenditures for new assets, which are represented down at the bottom, include the budget provision, a budget provision of $370,000 in 2027 for an emergency generator. And in your handout, this budget provision appears in 2000. It's highlighted on the screen here because in the handout it appears in 2025, but that generator will be, the replacement will be moved to 2027. We also have a fiber optic conduit plan to be laid from Hemsworth Road to Village Way to connect wells and reservoirs to our SCADA system. Rob, is there anything you'd like to add to that before I move forward?
No, unless there's some questions from council.
Okay. And then sewer capital program. Again, Rob had spoken to that as well. It includes sewer trunk main replacement and the sewer trunk metering program, which is upgrading and expansion to the program. So, Your Worship, the balance of the presentation, we will recap and review the operating budget pressures, which are typical of the day-to-day operating activities of the town, and the 5-year general fund capital budget, both which were presented on November the 20th, Committee of the Whole. We've also included some additional slides in that presentation that were presented from those that were included on November 20th based on questions and feedback we've received since the presentation. And also, not all of the slides that were presented on November 20th are included in the recap. So the budget process commenced in early August with all departments submitting new requests for operating budget provisions and capital projects to the Finance Department. All of the requests for new expenditures were collaboratively reviewed and prioritized and ranked by the leadership team in multiple meetings. And I'll talk a little bit more about those priority rankings later in the presentation. But the existing operating budget provisions were reviewed by the Finance Department in collaboration with department leads and reallocations of budget amounts were made wherever possible to address cost pressures. This process led to the optimizing and resource allocation and mitigating the impact on the property tax increase. Capital budgets were also reviewed at multiple leadership team meetings. Every capital budget request was assigned a priority ranking, and the addition to capital budgets included in the budget through council, in addition to the capital budgets that are included in the budget through council resolution. And only those projects that were deemed necessary have been included in the capital plan. Non-taxation revenue sources were also adjusted wherever possible in an effort to mitigate the reliance on property taxes to balance the budget. Just a reminder of the budget principles. We keep the long-term view in mind, and this ensures that priorities are pursued financially in a sustainable and resilient manner, and consider external economic conditions are taken into consideration. We also keep, in terms of affordability, the budget aims to keep property taxes and fees affordable through ensuring value for money and through productivity and innovation. Reserves are also used to smooth out and avoid volatility in the year-to-year taxes and to provide funding for future projects and infrastructure replacement. The town also takes a careful and strategic approach to the use of debt. So some debt servicing is anticipated as part of the long-term asset replacement plan process. Also, in terms of maintaining core infrastructure and amenities, we strive to ensure that the amenities are kept in an appropriate state of repair, and this is critical to the long-term resilience of the town. This means ensuring that obligations are not deferred and that infrastructure deficits and funding gaps do not accumulate to unacceptable levels. In addition to the principles, factors that are taken into consideration include inflationary cost pressures, and it's important to note that the cost pressures that local government experiences are quite different than those of a typical household. The Consumer Price Index that reviews a basket of goods for a typical household is not reflective of the types of cost pressures faced by local government. The local government faces cost pressures on materials and contract costs such as road painting, paving, heavy equipment maintenance costs, and facilities maintenance costs, which are quite different from the CPI. Therefore, it would be misleading to try to equate the increase in local government costs to the CPI, as the cost drivers for local government costs are quite different than those of the CPI. In terms of workforce planning, so workforce planning and organizational capacity reviews are done on an ongoing basis to ensure human resources capacity is used effectively to provide services expected by the community. It's important to keep in mind that annual wages and benefit cost adjustments are dictated by a collective agreement. Service user fees, including fees for water and sewer, are reviewed on a regular basis to ensure affordability and comparability with neighboring communities. We've talked about this at previous meetings, but the municipality faces a growing infrastructure renewal requirement. This was also confirmed through the asset management financial replacement strategy, which was presented to Council on October the 2nd, and Council will have an opportunity to see that presentation again on January the 8th. But what's been confirmed is that not unlike most municipalities across Canada, the town does have an infrastructure funding gap that needs to be addressed. Council was presented with alternative strategic risk-based scenarios to address tackling that gap. And as I mentioned earlier, they'll be revisited on January the 8th. There's also typically a desire for new infrastructure, which is linked to the quality of life of residents. And the town has very limited capacity to fund such requests and relies heavily on grant opportunities or borrowing to address these type of requests. Strategic initiatives are developed through the strategic planning process and funded through the budget process, and initiatives funded through the strategic planning process are funded through the Strategic Initiatives Reserve and through grants. Other operating projects requiring a one-time contribution will also be included in the proposed financial plan and funded from the use of grants or available surplus and not through increases in property taxation. To provide some regional context, we've listed some cost pressures being faced by other Vancouver Island municipalities, and they range from about 7% for Parksville to 15% for Port Alberni. This slide has been updated since November 20th based on information that was available this morning. So the Nanaimo and Parksville increases have been adjusted to reflect what was reported in the Nanaimo News this morning. What this slide illustrates is that similar budget pressures are being faced across municipalities which are subject to a similar basket of goods to the town. And the cost pressures that municipalities are facing are very different from the CPI, as I'd mentioned earlier. Thus, it would be misleading to compare the budget pressure on municipal costs to the CPI. The tax increase for Qualicum Beach falls within the range of the tax increases being under consideration by other municipalities. And it's important to note that these are under consideration and they're subject to change as council deliberates budgets in these communities. When comparing the costs of a typical household to costs of the municipality, the 2024 monthly cost of municipal property taxes for all services and amenities provided by the town, such as parks, trails, green spaces, trees, sidewalks, fire rescue, and police services, just to name a few. The cost of those municipal services is equivalent to the cost of a phone or cable or internet bundle for a typical household, which is kind of shown in the bar graph that's circled in red over there. So what this graph is illustrating is that local government is great value for money. In terms of the specific, a little bit more discussion of the specific cost pressures facing the town in 2025, which our directors did speak to in their operations presentations. The 2025 budget, proposed budget, includes workforce planning budget provisions for workforce alignment to existing services and for new services approved by council in 2024 for 2025. So more specifically, the proposed plan includes provisions for wildfire resiliency services based on recommendations from the wildfire resiliency plan, which was presented to council in early summer. It identified the need for a position for mitigating wildfire risk and providing outreach. This position is also necessary to continue to qualify for future grants. It will be partially funded by a grant and will also provide support in operations. So 0.6 of an FTE will be funded from an increase in property taxes, and 0.4 of an full-time equivalency position will be funded through a grant which was approved for years 2025 and 2026. The HR advisor position, which our director of HR spoke to, is essential to meet the growing demand for workforce planning and well-being, effective recruitment, labor relations, safety initiatives, and to manage the growing workload faced by our HR department. As our Director of Human Resources had mentioned, our workforce is aging rapidly, and the need for strategic succession planning, injury prevention, and the need for retaining institutional knowledge is growing. Our HR department is the smallest department in the municipality, currently with a staff of 2, and it supports the entire organization. And this addition will align the team size with similar organizations that typically have larger HR teams than ours. It'll also enable streamlining of HR processes, and this position will be funded from accumulated surplus and does not impact property taxes for 2025. As our Director of Infrastructure Services had spoken to the Parks Area Service Review, which was presented to Council on November 20th, it identified a staffing capacity gap between the existing resources that are available in the Parks area and the resources that are required to address new services that have been approved by Council, from taking on items such as Satlam Park and services that are demanded at the Eagle Crest entrance, just to name a couple. And that leaves a shortfall of 1,350 hours in our Parks Department to address those services. So that's equivalent to a 0.8 full-time equivalency position, and there is a budget provision included in the proposed 2025 plan for that position. The review also identified the number of staff hours that were required to provide existing levels of service to the community, and the available capacity or hours that are required are 2,000 short of what's required to provide the existing services. And this translates to the equivalent of a 1.2 full-time equivalent position, for which a budget provision has also been included in the proposed budget. The bylaws compliance officer, which our director of planning had spoken to, is included due to the growing need and demand for bylaw compliance services, and also for the need for succession planning. The department currently only has one bylaws officer, and there's a significant risk and gap in service if there were to be a prolonged absence or retirement. The proposed budget includes a provision for a one-time FTE equivalent to address these needs, funded by an increase in property taxation. The budget also includes a provision for a summer GIS student. There's a need to update GIS data sets that have grown exponentially as we capture information on our town's owned assets and mapping information. This represents a minor cost. However, the position is required to ensure that our GIS data systems are maintained and updated. Oops. Workforce planning goals with respect to compensation are to strive to make sure that our workforce is fairly compensated in comparison to similar employers. It's important to ensure increased employee retention, attract quality candidates, reduce legal risks, increase performance and productivity, increase workforce diversity, and ensure that we're meeting the goal of being an employer of choice. So the proposed budget takes into consideration that the collective agreement expires in mid-2025. The impact of that cost isn't known at this time. And the proposed budget also takes into consideration an expenditure provision to address paid-on-call firefighter retention. And sorry, this, I should have mentioned that the workforce planning change in FTEs does represent an increase to the average home of $6 per month, or $79 per year. And in terms of our workforce planning costs with respect to compensation and benefits provisions, the estimated increase to the average home would be about $7 per month, or $81 per year. Other operating budget pressures that are taken into consideration are inflationary increases for supplies and services, such as personal protective equipment in our fire services area, costs of road paint and contract services, material costs used in operations, our insurance for the organization, and computer and software licensing and IT managed costs. And these costs represent an increase to the average home of about $3 or $32, $3 per month or $32 per year. The contract for police services, I'd spoken to the composition of the department earlier. The contract increase reflects member compensation increases, and it has an impact of $2 per month increase to the average home in property taxes of $2 per month, or $25 per year. We've also spoken about the contribution to asset reserves. I've got $220 million. We own over $220 million in assets. Our Director of Infrastructure Services had mentioned 300. So this number is based on our financial statements at what we originally paid for those assets. We would be well over 300, I would imagine, to replace all of those assets. Our infrastructure is aging. Our contribution to asset reserves is not sufficient, as I mentioned previously, to sustainably address replacement of town-owned assets into the future. Our current contribution to our asset replacement reserve is about $1.3 million a year, and the assumed annual contribution is 5.2. And the asset replacement financing strategy, which will be presented on January 8th, we'll talk more about this. The increase that's included in our budget is a provision equivalent to 1.5% of last year's property tax rate, and that will result in an increase to the average home of about $3 per month or $35 per year in property taxes. In this slide, I've summarized the individual pressures that we've just gone over, and they translate to an $18 per month or $223 per year increase in municipal taxes to the average home, and that translates to a 9.6% tax increase. This may be sticker shock, and we will actually later in the presentation be recapping opportunities or options available to council to reduce this should council wish to. However, I'd just like to mention that the staff recommendation is to come forward with a proposed budget of increase of 9.6%. The impact to the average household, again, this would result in the annual tax bill for a home assessed at $995,000 going up to $2,539, an increase of $222 over the previous year, which translates to $19 a month, or 9.6%. When you take into consideration other services provided by the municipality for sewer, water, and the costs for the solid waste utility charge, which is contracted service through the RDN, the annual cost to the average home will be $3,628 a year for their municipal portion of property taxes, which represents an increase of $252 or 8% over the previous year. In terms of options to reduce the property tax impact, Council could consider reducing the annual contribution to the strategic initiative reserves by $125,000 or half, and that would result in a $2 per month or $23 per year reduction to the property tax pressure. Currently, the annual contribution is $250,000 a year. Reducing that contribution by one-half will create a tax pressure in 2026 should council wish to reinstate it. Alternatively, council could consider reviewing the initiatives to fit within the new, if they chose to reduce it on a permanent basis, they could review their strategic plan to make initiatives fit within that funding envelope. You could also consider reducing the 2025 increase to the contribution to the asset reserve from 1.5% of the previous year tax levy to 1%. This would provide some $1 per month or $12 per year reduction to the tax pressure. This would provide a minor reduction to the annual tax rate increase pressure, and however, it would conflict with the need to reach sustainable level of funding contribution towards asset reserves. We could also fund additional resources proposed for the bylaw compliance officer service area from accumulated surplus. So currently the proposed financial plan funds these from an increase in property taxation. This would still address the need for succession planning and would be a term, and then in this case, the position would be a term position funded from accumulated surplus until a service analysis is undertaken and reviewed by council. We could also reverse the additional provision for a 0.8 FTE for the new services that have been approved by council. This basically would result in the 1,350 work hours that are required annually. However, the implications of this would be to require the Committee of the Whole and Council to revisit decisions made regarding increased services at Satlam, Eagle Crest, and other locations. There are some more challenging options available to Council. Council could consider instructing staff to look at service reductions. So council could instruct staff to come back with options on reductions in levels of service in the Parks Department for the inclusion of the 2,000 hours or 1.2 FTE in the proposed plan. Council could consider adjusting the $300,000 contribution to the reserve for investment in new assets. Currently, we fund the contribution for the community transportation plan of $100,000 and the accessibility initiatives of $50,000 included in our capital budget from the investment in new assets. So in addition to the town's, what this would do is in addition to the town's portion for funding investments in new assets that come from the reserve, it would leave the town with very limited funding availability for investment in new assets. Council could also consider reducing the 2025 contribution to initiative reserves by an additional 125, so the 250,000 annual contribution could become nil. This would, if council were to reinstate this in 2026, it would simply be giving us a tax holiday for 2025 and deferring the tax pressure to 2026. Alternatively, if the contribution is not reinstated, then outer year initiatives would have to be significantly reduced and reviewed during the 2026 strategic planning process. So I've summarized the impact of these reductions. So really we're starting off with a $219 required property tax increase. And if we were to take a look at the reduction of the annual contribution, if we were to consider the reduction in the annual contribution to the strategic initiatives reserve by half, and also consider funding the bylaw compliance officer through accumulated surplus, it would result in dropping the tax pressure from 9.6% to 7.8%. Other alternatives that were identified in the earlier slides could further reduce the tax rate to 6.6%. And with that, I'm going to switch over to the capital review of the capital fund information that was presented at the November 20th meeting, which is included on pages 66 to 72 of the condensed budget book. So all of our capital projects were reviewed with a lens of prioritizing them and ranking them with respect to the criteria that are listed on the screen. So every project was assigned prioritization of council resolution, which meant that the project has been approved by council resolution and is included in the proposed plan as a result. Projects were also categorized as high risk, meaning that they were urgent and there was a risk to property or safety. Mandatory, meaning they were legislated by regulatory requirement to be replaced. And anything that's mandatory would also be required because it would be at end of useful life. And then there was a rating of required, which meant that if we don't include it in the capital plan, there'd be significant financial risk because those assets are at end of life and there'd be imminent service interruptions. And a ranking of desired, which meant that they're linked to the quality of life. And none of the staff proposed capital projects fall in the desired category. So in terms of looking at our 2025 capital budget, 11.9 million of the budget is for addressing the renewal and replacement of capital assets, and 1.8 million is for investment in new assets. Of the $11.9 million in renewal and replacement assets, 1.5 million is projects by council resolution, and that's the skate park project. There are 8 projects, and I have a subsequent slide that'll go over those 8 projects that have budget provision of about 3.7 million that are included due to being high risk. And there are 14 required projects with a budget provision of 6.7 million. In terms of our investment in new assets, the lion's share of the assets are included through council resolution with budget provision of $1.5 million, and 3 projects fall within the required category, and there are no projects that were given the rating of desired. In terms of our high-risk projects, here's a listing of all of our projects that were identified as high risk. You can see most of them fall in the drainage area. Our Director of Infrastructure Services had spoken briefly to these in his presentation earlier. And I'll just brief before moving on. All of these assets are considered to pose a risk to property or safety. And I can come back to these at the end of the presentation as questions arise. And then there were 3 projects that are mandatory replacement. They're also considered required, and they are the fire tender apparatus, the lifting bags for fire rescue, and the SCBA cylinder mask replacement, so personal protective equipment. Our overall budget for, I'm just going to pause for a quick sec and catch up on my notes. So our 2025 budget, as I mentioned earlier, is $11.9 million, and over 5 years, it's $44 million is required to address asset renewal and replacement. All replacement projects requested over the next 5 years are listed on pages 66 to 72 of the condensed budget book. And all projects roll up to one of these 6 categories, being transportation, drainage, facilities, parks and trails, airport, and vehicles and equipment. The 2025 to 29 proposed 5-year budget increases substantially over the budget that was included in the previous 5-year financial plan, which was 2024 to 28. The total budget increases by approximately $15 million for the 5 years. And in the next few slides, I'll identify some new projects that represent the significant increase in budget. So new projects that are included in the financial plan in the transportation area are the Highway 19A Memorial to Crescent Road West paving project, Primrose Street downtown revitalization, and the roundabout at 19 on 19A at Village Way. And we also have the Village Way at KSS. The projects highlighted in green are were identified as high-risk projects, so I've just identified them by a different color coding on the sheet here. The drainage budget increases by about $6.8 million from what was included in the previous year's financial plan, and new projects listed comprise of an increase in the Seacrest slope stabilization was included. However, based on recent estimates, the budget increases by 1.7 in comparison to what was included in the previous financial plan. And then we have the Eagle Crest Drive storm main replacement, Schoolhouse Tributary Creek restoration, the drainage master plan, Balsam storm system, drainage replacement improvements, Grandin Creek confluence, foreshore storm drain outfall, and the Hoy Lake Road detention pond at Heritage Forest. And the stars beside those, the projects that are starred indicate that those projects represent a new investment in assets. So that's an asset that does not currently exist. It's not replacement, it's actually investment in new assets. Again, in parks and trails area, the Judges Row, the new fence around the off-leash dog park, tennis courts resurfacing, and bike racks are all new projects that were not included in the previous 5-year financial plan. And in facilities, in the facilities area, we did have a provision included for the maintenance of town facilities. However, the increase represents about $1 million over 5 years, and we've included approximately $535,000 per year for facility of town, for maintenance of town facilities that Director of Infrastructure Services had spoken to earlier as well. Also have a project for storage of equipment and drying out and drying of gear at the Parks Yard. And in the vehicles and equipment and airport area, we have an increase of $1 million to the budget in comparison to last year, and that's due to the increase in the estimate for the tender apparatus, which is scheduled for replacement in 2026, and then 183,000 represented by smaller equipment replacement and additions, which are identified on pages 71 and 72 of the condensed budget book. And then we have a generator at the airport, and the reason we've got that in a different color here is because we're wrestling with whether that falls within the high risk or required, which ranking categorization, which is to be determined by staff. Oops, wrong button. So in terms of our investment in new assets, you can see from this screen that our investment in new assets ranges from about 1.8 million per year in 2025 to about 4 million in 2029, and or is 17.2 million over the 5 years. Points to note on the investment in new assets is there is limited available town resources to address the investment in new assets. So currently these large investments have been included with the assumption of possibly available grant funding in outer years. And there is also the assumption of long-term borrowing to address the town's contribution. 2025 does not include any projects with long-term borrowing identified as a funding source. And so based on priority importance of outer year projects, borrowing may have to be contemplated to fund these projects. The addition of, what is also worth noting is that the addition of new projects also results in increased life cycle costs, and so that'll result in an additional pressure on the gap for infrastructure replacement and life cycle costs. And here we've got some slides that show the prioritization of the investments in new assets. And so essentially, projects included in the financial plan as a basis of a council resolution are listed on the slide here. And they include the bus garage site, the visitor information center and washroom, Satlam Park washrooms, a new facility to support park users, Cenotaph at Memorial Avenue, the pickleball courts, bike racks at the waterfront, community gardens, community transportation initiatives, accessibility improvements, and the Primrose parking and Harlech Road parking design. High-risk projects include the that represent additions to infrastructure, include the Village Way at Qualicum Secondary School, and it's also a transportation plan improvement, budget of $1.9 million. And next few slides here are going to just spin some interest in what's been funded from our various grants. So we received a Growing Communities contribution last year of about 3.3 million, and 3.2 of that is allocated to the projects listed on this slide, being the pickleball courts, the skate park, operations workplace modernization, Satlam Park, and the bus garage site planning and public engagement and construction project. So we've leveraged that 3.2 million for projects with an estimated budget or cost of $16.1 million. We also receive a contribution for Community Works, or what was previously known as a gas tax fund, and we've used those contributions that we've received in the last couple of years and that are allocated to us for upcoming years to fund the projects listed on this screen, being the Public Works fuel system, the upsized pipe and abandoned old CSV ravine, infill at Village Way, the airport generator, master drainage plan, Balsam storm system, Highway 19A, and Grandin Creek confluence. And again, the project highlighted in green represents high risk. And I should have also highlighted the Public Works fuel system, which is a high-risk project, which I missed highlighting on my slide. Projects that are basically either based on anticipated receipt of grants or dependent on grants are the paving at the airway and, paving at the airport, equipment at the airport. Grant applications have been submitted, and we expect to hear back on those grants in early to mid 2025. The Seacrest Slope Stabilization Project with a budget of $2.6 million. Again, a grant application has been submitted for this project, and we are waiting to hear back on that in 2025. It is worth noting that this is a high-risk project, and it's budgeted in 2025. So in the event that we're unsuccessful in the grant application, we will be coming back to council with alternative funding recommendations so that we can proceed with this project in 2025. Also included in the financial plan and grant dependent is the Eagle Crest Drive storm main replacement. It's included in one of the outer years. And the Little Qualicum Riverbank stabilization in 2000. This is the engineering for the project, which is required to make a bigger grant application for the actual stabilization works. Other grant partnership independent projects are listed on this screen along with the year in which they're budgeted. And they include the Village Way pavement improvements at and safety improvements at Qualicum Secondary School, the pickleball courts, the Eagle Crest Drive storm main replacement, the Schoolhouse Creek Tributary Creek restoration, the new Visitor Information Center and public washroom, and Highway 19A Memorial Crescent paving between Memorial Crescent and Highway 19A paving Memorial Crescent Road, to Crescent Road West, So that's just over by the Shady Rest. And again, they continue on. Grant-dependent projects, so Highway 19A paving Village Way roundabout project, the Highway 19A entrance sign, new facility to support community park users, multiple entrance sign, replacement, the Hoyloik Road detention pond, the East Village Phase 3. So a large number of projects included in the financial plan, which are grant dependent due to limited resources available in the town's reserves to address these. This slide basically illustrates, this slide is referring to the strategic initiatives. So in the condensed budget book, we have a project in the progressive infrastructure area, which is referred to as the parking management strategy. And we'll be changing the title of that, or we're proposing to change the title of that to the parking management strategy, including review of off-street parking and reserve fund bylaw number 500.02 2005 and paid permitted parking plan for uptown businesses with a budget of $42,000. And this was a result of committee of the whole recommendations that were made, but there is also, so basically the project is a combination of the 3 scoping sheets and individual initiatives that were approved or recommended by council be combined into the one, and it is included on the green sheet as a recommendation to the committee of the whole. I'll let Danielle bring that up on the screen, and maybe we could just go over that.
Ms. Varela.
Thank you, Your Worship. So this is the only decision point we're asking the committee for today, which really, as the director discussed, gives us a bread trail for where those scoping sheets went, being officially closed off, combined, and moved forward as per council's direction to date. Any of those council committee of the whole recommendations through strategic planning will actually be ratified on December 11th at council. So we're not taking those as direction quite yet, but we're anticipating those. Your Worship, I could read out all of the whereases, or I could go right to the now therefore, which actually shows where we're heading.
Because it's a late addition, I think it would be good to read it out for the people at home as well. Or
Thank you, Your
wherever
Worship.
they're watching.
Thank you, Your Worship. So whereas at the October 21st, 2024 Committee of the Whole meeting, in consideration of Strategic Planning Initiative 24GG13, entitled Develop a Cash in Lieu of Parking Bylaw, Committee of the Whole recommended to Council that the timeline for the initiative titled Develop a Cash in Lieu of Parking Bylaw be delayed from 2025 in the 2024 to 2028 financial plan and reassigned to 2027 in the 2025 to 2029 financial plan. And further, that the funding source for the initiative titled Develop a Cash in Lieu Parking Bylaw be changed from the Strategic Initiatives Reserve to capacity funding allocated to the town. And whereas at the October 21st, 2024 Committee of the Whole meeting, in consideration of Strategic Planning Initiative 25 PI02, Paid Permitted Parking Plan for Uptown Businesses, Committee of the Whole recommended to Council that a $10,000 budget provision for the initiative titled Paid Permitted Parking Plan for Uptown Businesses be included in fiscal 2026 of the 2025 to 2029 financial plan. And further, that the initiative titled Paid Permitted Parking Plan for Uptown Businesses becomes part of the scope of the work of the initiative titled Parking Management Strategy, with a total combined project budget of $30,000 in fiscal 2026 of the 2025 to 2029 financial plan. And whereas at the November 1st, 2024 Committee of the Whole meeting, Committee of the Whole discussed the need for more information on parking in lieu provisions before discussing Capital Strategic Planning Initiative 25 CAP PI02 miscellaneous parking improvements further, with the recommendation on the floor being subsequently withdrawn. And whereas at the November 13th, 2024 Committee of the Whole meeting, in consideration of Strategic Planning Initiative 25 CAP PI02 miscellaneous parking improvements, Committee of the Whole recommended to Council that consideration of parking on Primrose Street be included in the Parking Strategy Review plan for fiscal 2026, and further that consideration of expansion of the Civic Center parking be included in the Parking Strategy Review plan for fiscal 2026, and further that exploration of parking opportunities on Fern Road West be referred to the Parking Strategy Review plan for 2026. That the Committee of the Whole recommends to Council that review of the Town of Qualicum Beach Off-Street Parking and Reserve Fund Bylaw number 500.02/2005, scheduled for 2028, be advanced to fiscal 2026 and combined with the Parking Strategy Review. And further, that the budget for review of the Town of Qualicum Beach Off-Street Parking and Reserve Fund Bylaw number 500.02/2005, with the budget provision of $12,000 and the Parking Strategy Review with a budget provision of $20,000 be combined for a budget provision of $32,000 in fiscal 2026. So that's really the breadcrumbs of multiple meetings and Committee of the Whole recommendations. So what we're going to do for ease is combine them now with what I'll read. Now, therefore, Committee of the Whole wishes to rescind and consolidate the recommendations and recommends to Council that Strategic Initiative Scoping Sheets 25 PI02 Paid Permitted Parking Plan for Uptown Businesses, and 24 GG13 Develop a Cash in Lieu Parking Bylaw be closed by council resolution. That Scoping Sheet 24 PI02 be renamed Parking Management Strategy, including review of off-street parking and reserve fund bylaw, number 500.02, and paid permitted parking plan for uptown businesses. That a total budget provision of $42,000 be included in fiscal 2026 of the 2025 to 2029 financial plan for the initiative titled Parking Management Strategy, including review of off-street parking and reserve fund bylaw number 500.02 and paid permitted parking plan for uptown businesses. And one more, that $12,000 be funded from capacity funding and $30,000 be funded from the Strategic Initiatives Reserve for the strategic initiative titled Parking Management Strategy, including review of off-street parking and reserve fund bylaw number 500.02 and paid permitted parking plan for uptown businesses. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Ms. Varela. Very well read. And would council like to deal with this now? It's a recommendation to the council meeting, I assume, for December 11th. So would council like to deal with this now or after we go to all the questions, if you have any from Mr. Hare? Do it now? Thank you. So would someone care to move this recommendation? Councillor Young, Councillor Skipsey, discussion. Councillor Harrison.
Yeah, just briefly before we start allocating the funds, does staff have a rough idea of, when we're talking about paid parking in our downtown, the cost in terms of bylaw compliance relative to revenue? I'm assuming this is something that'll be generated through the report. Do we have any sort of a rough idea that we might just be treading water? You know, we spend $40,000 worth of staff time to generate $40,000 in revenue.
Ms. Varela.
Your Worship, no, that level of analysis has not been undertaken in advance of staff being provided such direction.
Mr. Sales, that's it? Good, thank you. Any further comments or questions? Councillor Young.
Having such a bylaw, would that then be expectations of another bylaw officer?
Mr. Sales.
I'll answer this time. So the intention of doing the parking strategy is to ask and answer these very questions that I think council is looking into. So the motion before you essentially just consolidates multiple directions that have been provided as recommendations from committee of the whole into one block, so that we're clear that in 2026 there's a parking management strategy encompassing multiple council direction that will be undertaken with a budget of $42,000. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sales. Mr. Harrison, Councillor Harrison.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. So yeah, just I do remember multiple meetings we've had a discussion of. One of the biggest things, it was one of the first meetings in the previous term, was that we have a real allocation problem with our parking in our downtown. That we have a lot of parking spots are sort of out of the way, people don't use. I'm not sure if paid parking is the best way to get them to use that, but at least this report doesn't bind us to a decision point. It's just getting the information so we can make an informed decision in 2 years' time.
Yes, that's correct. This is a recommendation to the council meeting on December 11th. Councillor Skipsey? Councillor Van der Valk? Councillor Van der Valk.
Just so I'm clear, in the last part, or the actual recommendation, do I understand correctly that developing a cash in lieu of parking bylaw will then not happen? I'm not quite clear on that. Sorry, you read the wording very well, but I just need clarification of the intention of the wording. Thank you.
Ms. Varela.
So that actually would be combined within the strategy.
Okay. So are you ready for the question? All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Thank you. You have your direction at least to go to the council meeting on December 11th. So back to the presentation that Mr. Hare and other staff so aptly put to us. Are there any comments or questions at this point before we go to the gallery for their comments and questions? Councillor Harrison.
Your Worship, I actually had a couple more slides to go before I completed, before we went to questions, if you don't mind.
All right then.
Just a quick correction on page 67 of the condensed budget book related to the whereases that were read out by our CAO. We've included a expansion of the Civic Center parking lot that will be removed in the, as we update the budget book.
All right, thank you.
And then just a quick, in terms of where we're at right now, we're at public engagement session number 2. So this is our strategic planning and budget timeline. We will be summarizing information from the committee of the whole meetings and public engagement into the form of a report coming to council on December 11th, seeking direction to prepare financial plan bylaw, which we'll bring back to council on January 22nd for proposed first and second readings, and then for third reading on February 26th, and ultimate adoption targeted for March 12th. And that, now I'll turn it over to you, Your Worship. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any comments, questions from council? Councilor Young, go ahead.
Just going through this whole booklet, I kind of have a question on every other page.
Start
Is that
asking.
too many? Okay, on human resources.
So if you would mind saying what page you're on?
Oh, on page 8,
And this is the handout.
on the compact.
Sorry?
I believe the counselor is referring to the PowerPoint. So
Page 8. The one we just got today. Yes. So that's
Yeah, I think I have this.
This is the budget. That's part of your agenda. So you have questions on the slides. Yes. Okay, so the slide numbers are right there in the corner.
Clarity for the public, if you could also bring that page up on the screen, that would help. So you're on page 8 of the municipal operations. That's the one?
Yes. My question is, when we're hiring replacement for aging out employees, how long do they shadow the aging out person? Or can that just be kind of a temporary 1 month extra hire to have someone to be trained into that position? Or is that a all year long shadowing?
I would say it all depends on how complex the job is, what are the tasks, responsibilities, impact of the decisions of each position, so it can absolutely vary. We need to focus on creating a program that would cover succession planning for every position for the entire organization. We right now have some pieces here and there, but we need a strategic approach given the level of retirements that we are expecting.
So my thought on that is just that when we hire that extra person, will they be taking on all the extra work so that we will get work done as well as just someone learning to take on a position?
Yes, the short answer is yes. The new approved HR specialist position will help us create capacity to deal with these strategic initiatives. And yes, this is one of the priorities that have been identified.
All right, go ahead. You can ask 2 questions, so we don't have to go back and forth too much.
Okay, in regards to Satlam
What page
Park,
are you on?
page 32, slide 32. I know we have funding allotted for Satlam Park, but it's a registered nonprofit society, and instead of taxpayer increase, I'd like to see all of us support the nonprofit organization by helping with fundraising, and we in turn would get tax receipts, the different residents that support this. So hoping that would take something off the taxpayers' budget increase.
I think the organization, this nonprofit, is dealing with the cottage, the old lodge, and this is for the park, the larger area around the cottage. So it's washrooms, playground, which is, actually, I want to ask about that later. But so this is a different thing than asking them to pay for our park upkeep. All right? Councillor Harrison.
Like Councillor Young, there's a bunch. So first thing, I know it bedeviled us in the previous term. When we are looking at the estimated tax increase, are we assuming we'll be successful with those grant applications, or is this baking in a tax increase predicated on getting no grants whatsoever? And if we get grants, that'll amend what the budgetary impact will be.
Mr. Hare.
Yeah, so grant applications will not impact the tax rate increase. So if we don't have any projects included in the operating budget that are grant dependent. The only grant dependent projects that we have included typically are in the capital budget, and capital budget items don't impact the tax rate. We operate on a reserves method, so we use reserves to fund our projects and not property taxes specifically for capital.
But we do then have to replenish our reserves, right? And that ultimately, it comes from taxation. It's not usually from land sales. So there is a bit of an eventual connection as we look at our long-term financial plan, right? I'm assuming we don't just deplete our reserves and then there's nothing if we don't get the grants.
Through your worship to Councillor Harrison, that is correct. And as we had identified in the presentation, our reserves, basically the contribution to our reserves is far below what is required for sustainable asset replacement. So that pressure is addressed in that context.
That's quite reasonable. It's just, I was looking at things like the airport paving, for example, so a $3.7 million project. I know in past budgets, sometimes people would say, look how much money you're spending, and they didn't realize a lot of it is like grant dependent. So it became a bit of a communication thing with some folks in the committee, not everyone, but some people. I just want to avoid, because the capital projects this year, there's a bunch where some folks might ask, is this necessary to do it immediately? And then I guess for the next one, just because I'm trying to pick because there's so many, actually I'll just go through sequentially to the thing. Just when we're looking at this, the cost for RCMP, just one thing I want to flag for council and the public. I had an informal conversation with Staff Sergeant DeCoyne at the First Nations art exhibit on the reserve, which Mayor Westbrook attended. And he did mention the new body camera program, so we're not part of the initial rollout, but it'll probably be the next year. And he's estimated the cost to Oceanside RCMP at $300,000, just as a heads up. But that's technically two things, so I'll let other folks go.
Thank you. And we pay our proportionate share. Councillor Skipsey?
Thank you. Just to confuse the parking issue some more. So we've done this nice motion, but in our slide deck, and so that's page 55 on the slide deck, it says new asset prioritization, and the bottom thing is Primrose Parking, Harlech Road parking design, transportation, $53,000 in 2026. So is that still a go? Or is that different?
Thank you. Yes, through the chair to Councillor Skipsey. There's essentially two parking-related things happening in parallel. One is for the overall strategy, how we manage parking as a whole. And the second, which we discussed in the previous Committee of the Whole meeting, was how do we increase the availability of parking in the short term? So there were some specific projects that council considered, and the Harlech Road design was one of them. There were a few others as well. So that is happening. That's not a part of the strategy.
Okay. Because I thought the Harlech Road one was 8,000, and I thought that was the only one that had been approved by council so far. But maybe not. Maybe given what we've just approved, maybe we have.
Well, we haven't approved anything. You just made a recommendation, but perhaps there's an answer to the question. Ms. Miller.
When we were going through the slide deck, I did flag that as for follow-up with staff, so we can bring that item back. I'd like to, given the very extensive discussion about parking, I agree. I had also flagged that for a question, so that's noted.
I have another one that I'll ask. And in the presentation, sometimes the percentage for increase in wage and benefits is reflected as 2%, and sometimes it's reflected as 3%. And I just wondered why that is.
Sorry, I believe it's due to rounding. So I've just rounded the numbers. I haven't gone to the exact decimal point. I've just used an approximate, so it will be, I should have said less than in my presentation or a little bit greater than.
Yeah, well, maybe if I just, like specifically under the CAO or corporate services, it's reflected as a 2% increase due to increase in wages and benefits expected, right? And then under other departments like finance and operations, it's reflected as a 3%. So that's just rounding? Is that what I'm understanding?
Sorry, are you referring to the slide decks to the slide deck, sorry?
No, it's actually in the budget document.
Oh, in the
So when you look at the operational costs, we went through, like with CAO, and then corporate services, it indicates a 2% increase. And then when we get into finance and operation, it's reflected as a 3% increase. So I'm just not sure why that is.
Okay, my apologies to my earlier response. So it's not due to, I thought you were referring to the slide, to something else in the slide deck. So again, cost pressures are different in each department. I mean, our salary and wages costs are the big driver, and it's pretty consistent. However, there are materials cost pressures and whatnot, so the accumulation of those different types of cost pressures would result in different pressures in the different departments. Does that address your?
I guess it's just like under mayor and council, the operating, it says 2%, no, yeah. Contractual remuneration and benefit increases is expected to be 2%. And then when we go to corporate services, again, yeah, it says increase due to annual wage and benefit increases. So it says 2%.
So in other departments, it would be higher because, you know, the additional resources that we have identified are included in this budget book. So for example, when you look at the salaries and wages in the planning department or the bylaws department, we had included a provision of an additional bylaws officer there.
Ms. Varela.
Thank you, Your Worship. So as noted at the beginning of the presentation, this is draft. So I think when we get into is it 2 or is it 3, does the note need clarification? It would be really helpful if that question was flagged for staff, as it has been, and then we can come back in the next version of the budget book with additional clarity. So that has been noted, and we'll get that sorted out at the staff level. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Ms. Councillor Van der Valk.
Thank you. Well, I had a lot of very detailed questions, but I'm going to just ask some general questions. On page 42, or 48 rather, of the budget book, the draft budget book, outlining the 2 bylaw officers. So my question is, and it somewhat was answered as one of the options that would be available to council if we decided to try to reduce the tax burden. But would the position be kept permanently, this additional bylaw officer, or is this just on a short-term basis?
Ms. Varela.
Thank you, Your Worship. The recommendation before the Committee of the Whole is to consider it as a term position for 2 years. We would anticipate if Council chose this direction, we would come back with a service level analysis before making the position permanent. Alternatively, Council may anticipate without the benefit of that service level review that you would like to increase service in that department. So again, it's a governance decision, but the reduction proposed is for a term position not funded from taxation, and it would come back for future consideration with a service level review.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. And I don't have a page number, but it falls under a question regarding the airport. I believe at one point we had discussion about software being available to record touch and go, and that there might be income that could be made if there were a charge for that. And I don't believe that was mentioned in the report today. So I'm just wondering if there is any further information regarding that.
Thank you. Ms. Varela.
Thank you, Your Worship. So staff has been researching the opportunity for software, what is the tool by which we could do that. We would anticipate exploring that further as part of the bylaw review that is being directed for advancement in 2025. If staff has any more recent update on this availability of software, that's fine, but otherwise, I think that answers the question, Your Worship.
Thank you. You got 2 questions every round, so we'll keep coming around until we get them all. Councillor Young.
Going to the tree bylaw, where there's $40,000 allocated for a review, I'd like to see that taken off. There's been recommendations by the Friends of the Forest. That doesn't cost us anything. And I just think that the tree bylaw costs us money because it requires a bylaw officer to enforce it. It also costs our residents money when they're just trying to manage a tree on their property. I think that in our OCP review that we can be more clear on what we require of developers in when they go to clear cutting a piece of property or whatever. But as far as residents and the tree bylaw, I really think that we should look at dropping that to save money. My second question, my next question though, is about speeding tickets from our local police. Do we get the funding from the speeding tickets?
Ms. Varela.
It depends if the RCMP writes that as a provincial ticket or a municipal ticket. I don't have that level of detail at my fingertips, but we could bring an analysis back for council. With regards to the first comments about the tree bylaw, Your Worship, we do have a recommendation from Committee of the Whole to council. If Committee of the Whole wanted to suggest an alternate path forward, you could discuss that today as well. So the direction would be appreciated.
Thank you.
So going back to the speeding tickets in our municipality, then I would like to have hours designated by a police officer to do speed patrol, because we have many residents that complain about the speed going through the neighborhood and want it to be reduced to, 30 kilometers an hour. So can we maybe utilize that police officer that we do have a few hours of the day to enforce speeding tickets?
Ms. Varela.
Thank you, Your Worship. We are in discussions with the staff sergeant for a presentation to council. That staffing allocation is a very complex matter for the local government, never mind the RCMP. So I thought it would be useful, and councillors had made this suggestion previously, so we anticipate the staff sergeant being here in January, maybe February, to answer council questions on those matters.
Thank you. And I need council to, I would need their input. But by making suggestions like, I want the tree bylaw gone, I would suggest perhaps have notices of motions for the next decision-making point, so that we can see what you're up, what council, individual council wants to do, The rest of council has time to look at it, and when it comes to a decision-making, we can vote on it, invite staff input, and so on. So I think it would be very helpful, because we just got a lot of information, and we will get more, is that we would make notices of motion to the next decision-making point. Thank you. Back to Councillor Harrison.
Okay. There's a lot of things, but just one thing too. I'm pretty sure the data is that there are 3 officers for all of Oceanside for traffic. Essentially, they do traffic. They do speeding tickets. And so a new officer hire, I think it was quoted at about $240,000 per officer. So if we wanted to have someone who would be dedicated to Qualicum Beach, it would be $250,000 basically. So just highlighting when we say we would want more service, it does come with a cost. And I think they're currently having a difficult time, but again, we'll get that update in January. And I think the RCMP staff sergeant is a lot better positioned than myself to speak to that.
That's fair. We'll ask him about that.
Yeah,
how
yeah.
we could accommodate him.
Oh, no, it's a perfectly fair question, but I think it'll come with a price tag.
Oh, yeah.
One question just that sort of arose, I don't think it's really been addressed so far. I know when we were looking at our waterfront master plan, most of what we're doing right now is more on parking. My concern is a few years ago we saw a failure of the seawall right by our new infrastructure, which managed fine. And the town has a lot of seawall along the waterfront. I'm just wondering, when we're looking at our asset replacement strategy, are we actually assessing the state of that seawall? Do we know if there's going to be an issue where we have to start replacing any portion in the future? Or is this something where we'd have to make a separate resolution to do that analysis work?
Mr. Dickinson.
If I may, I feel like this is probably a dual response from Luke and myself. From an asset management perspective, we have the master plan, which in many instances is either removing or relocating that wall to try to naturalize the foreshore. So trying to do that by property is cost prohibitive. So to your point is we need to take that master plan, combine it with looking at that asset and where we're seeing the poorer conditions and start working with those property owners as well as our own walls that we own. And that would be a long-term project, but we need to do it sooner rather than later.
And just to follow up on that, Mr. Sales and I, in the previous term, were sitting on calls with Fisheries, Ministry of Environment, and a whole bunch of staff people because when we're one of the pioneers that aren't on an island for green shoring, so by being a pioneer, we discovered how the systems don't really work. That was sort of trying to get across the message of we want to encourage this at the provincial level, so let's make sure all the systems are more integrated. But I do recall, specifically speaking to that staff, we have a waterfront master plan which speaks of that. We've done some examples both on public and private land, which as far as I know, have worked out very well. And if you're doing it, if the process is smooth, which is still a work in progress last I heard, it's actually not that expensive. So I remember advocating to them that they should start funding essentially pilot projects on public land to show off this is what green shoring is. It looks nice, works well, protects your foreshore, enhances biodiversity, et cetera, et cetera. So I just want to make sure if that bug is in the ear of provincial staff, that we don't lose out on the opportunity to get some funding if we were going to replace a portion of our seawall with green shoring. And then the second thing, just to stay on the beach and get the beach done with, accessibility. So I remember in previous iteration of strategic planning and the budgeting process, we were talking about 2028 for beach access for accessibility. However, if grants become available, we might consider it earlier. The last time I heard, when Liz was still around, who was the staff person who was sort of working a lot with the Accessibility Committee, we were looking at enhancing washroom access on public property. And I know I've got that response before, but just for that specific initiative, because I know, forgive me, I know Councillor Skipsey was very keen on, if we could do it earlier, that would be lovely. Is there a way that we could at least, because we're in a bit of a bind, like in order to do a grant application, staff need to do stuff, but staff time is really limited. So how do we have this back and forth with the province of, because we're gonna need the province to sign off just because of the wildlife management area. So how, is that something that would require a separate resolution or something we need to look at? Or is that something that we'll sort of, if there's a grant opportunity, we'll find out?
Mr. Sales.
Thank you. Through the chair to Councillor Harrison. Allow me to summarize the question, and then if my answer, or if the summary is accurate, I'll do my best to answer. So there is an intention to provide increased accessibility for people to get from the upland to the foreshore, and we used the Moby map previously. It didn't work. So your question was, what would the approvals process look like for the town to be able to do some alternate approvals or alternate project to get down there? And does council need to designate or allocate resources for staff to do preliminary work on that? Is that okay?
Just to comment on what you said about the seawall, we've done some minor improvements near the Grannon Creek outlet. There are two piles of rocks, I think they call them reefs or some other name, but they are working, except when I spoke with Mr. Reedshaw and a different project, he's also did some work with a private property owner at the end of Hickson, which seems to be working really well. But those piles of rocks are higher, and he actually told me that it would be advisable to consider adding about a foot of boulders or rocks to the two little islets that we have there, because the power of the waves that are crushing over that are still taking out land right below the benches in that area at the beginning of, at the beginning of West Crescent towards the waterfront park. So that it sounds like a reasonable thing to do, rather than rebuilding a seawall, which is going to be subject to more and more climate change and actions by waves and storms, is to do more green shoring. And I know Milner Gardens has done something similar, and it seems to be working. So rather than focusing on the seawall, is focusing on the cause of the undermining of the seawall. That's just a thought. Thank you.
If I may, I thought there was a resolution the previous term about that, the dying days of the previous term. But I think so far, in terms of implementation of the Waterfront Master Plan, we focus more on parking and the sort of pedestrian / cyclist lane, as opposed to focusing on that whole transition of seawall to green shore, which is actually in the Waterfront Plan. And the science, by the way, for folks who are at home, the science is incredible. Read the appendices. They are so fascinating, beyond my level of totally understanding everything, but it's brilliant stuff.
So anybody who wants to see how this could work, if you walk down Buller Road or just go through the St. Andrews or Satlam Park and turn to the west, there's some private property owners there, and they have made some significant improvements. And I was visiting there the other day, and it was incredible of what happened with the neighboring properties with logs and waves coming over their seawall, but nothing happened at their property. So I know you know who I'm referring to, and I don't want to mention their name, but if you walk along the waterfront, you will see it. And it's quite remarkable how the beach actually has been restored in those particular areas. Anyway, that's just on the side comment, but that's where I would like to see us focus, rather than saying building a seawall, which is going to be subject to more and more damage from sea level rise. Councillor Skipsey.
We didn't actually get at the question for the accessibility. Mr. Sales rephrased the question that we didn't quite answer it.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Through the chair, I will answer it. So yes, that would require considerable staff resources to go through the approval process with the province to be able to build anything on the Crown foreshore land. So that would require council direction. Thank you.
Yeah, and we did do the Moby mat, but after a high level, after sea level, not sea level, a high tide and some strong winds, because we have so many rocks and boulders but it has to go over, some of them got removed just a little bit. But if you go along there, all of a sudden your wheels or your foot go into that little dip, and you can spray your ankle and trip and make it worse. So it was very difficult for us to maintain a solid path underneath the Moby mat. It wasn't the Moby mat itself, it was underneath. And because of the tide and how it sucks stuff out, it removed a few pieces of rock that made it actually dangerous. It would be a liability rather than an improvement. Councillor Skipsey.
Okay, so I have two questions, or yeah, one's for clarification. My first question is about the fire department, and our training has gone from 60,000 in 2021 to almost double, well, 110,000 in 2025, the budget. So I'm wondering if that's because we have a lot of turnover, or if we've increased the training, or what's the story behind that figure? Thank you.
Thank you. Chief Cornell.
Thank you. So part of it is how we're allocating funds. So we bring in private training providers to train in our station, and then basically contract those spots out to other departments. Now that funding, Mr. Hare can explain it, but it's being included as a training expense because we have to pay for that contractor to come in. Before it was an in and out, so you didn't see it thing. So that's the tune of about $18,000. The rest of it is due to a larger recruit class. We're bringing in 2 recruit classes, or 1 recruit class a year, so there's 2 recruit classes going on at a time, and the cost of training has increased.
You have a second question?
Yep, thank you. Thank you for answering that. The second one is, I don't believe, I could be wrong, and I'm happy to be proven wrong, but that council has actually approved the 0.8 in the Parks Department, that position, because we deferred it at the last council meeting until after some more information was received. And I would challenge council that we not increase service and service levels to perhaps avoid having to have that additional staff person, because I think some of the things that were listed under that responsibility could maybe be deferred or different solutions, so thank you.
So, Mr. Hare, there were 2 lines, one about adding a full-time and one adding a 0.8. Can we identify the difference and what was approved by a previous resolution? Councilor, Ms. Varela.
If you could just give us a moment, because I actually want to pull up the motions rather than us.
Sure.
Just one moment, please.
Thank you.
That'll just take a minute to pull up that motion, but for clarification, Your Worship, anything that's come out of strategic planning is only a recommendation from Committee of the Whole to Council, and we anticipate Council will be ratifying those on December 11th or providing alternate direction to staff. So Councillor Skipsey is absolutely correct, and it hasn't been, anything coming out of strategic planning hasn't been approved yet. But I'd actually just like to pull up the motion. If we could come back to that while staff continue to research.
Sure. This is like watching cost estimates in the legislature. They get a question and then they turn to the staff. So it's okay. It's better to be right than trying to wing it. So thank you for that. Councillor Skipsey?
That was my 2 questions.
Good, thank you. Councillor Vennevar, thank you.
Thank you. I have two fairly detailed and small questions, just more for information. On page 7 of the actual draft booklet, under employment, this is just a description of Qualicum Beach, the community of Qualicum Beach, and employment, various, in this part, gives various projections as to what might happen, and it says manufacturing is expected to experience modest growth. I'm just wondering what manufacturing that refers to.
Who put that in there? Mr. Sills, you're brave.
Yeah, I'll just take it for the team, I guess. I would say it depends on the definition of modest. there are manufacturing activities identified in our official community plan that the community would welcome. And currently, I think council and the public are aware there's very little manufacturing, so any increase would be modest.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Very well done, Mr. Sales. The other, or another question that I had is in regard to the visitor center, and I'm sorry I don't have a page number for where this refers to, but I did notice that there is a $500,000 contribution from the town to go towards the new washroom at the visitor center. And it did outline a grant of $325,000 and the remainder of $125,000 coming from the town. I'm just wondering, is that correct? Is it grant dependent, essentially grant dependent?
Your Worship, can I come back to that question just a quick minute? I'm just going to call that up to bring up the funding source, and we can go to another question.
Yeah, you don't have the page number?
No, my apologies. It was fairly close to the end, I believe, but I can try and find it myself. But I have another quick, easy question.
Ms. Rilla?
Your Worship, if council would consider giving us a few-minute break, that might be nice. We're 2 hours into the meeting, and perhaps we could just use a few minutes and let staff catch up to the questions.
Sure. So ask your next question, and then we'll take a break.
Okay. There was reference made to the replacement of the Judges Row staircase. And I'm just wondering which staircase. Is it the wooden staircase at the end of Judges Row or the one in the middle?
No, it is the one at the end. There's the, if you go underneath them, which isn't advisable, there's quite a bit of rot going on in the wood structure, especially near the top.
Yeah. All right, so with that, a short recess, or did you get the answers?
I've got the answer for that
Okay.
one, actually.
And then we'll take a break.
So the new visitor center program is funded from, and basically looking for grant opportunities. So it is grant dependent to the amount of $375,000, and the other $125,000 is provided through DCCs that qualify for funding, basically investments on the beachfront.
So with that, can I have a motion for a 10-minute recess? Councillor Harrison, Councillor Young, all in favor? We have a 10-minute recess. Thank you. I think the 10 minutes have passed, so back to the question, and I think I left off with Councillor Young, so go ahead, Councillor Young.
Done? Okay. On today's condensed version on page 18 on asset replacement funding, I'm just wanting clarification on when we do asset replacement funding, which bucket is it that we're aligning to from Mr. Paul's presentation? I forget his last name, sorry. Like, I want to know what our risk is.
Sorry, can you repeat your question there, Councillor Young?
Right.
Sorry, on page 18 of the condensed version, on the asset replacement funding, I just want to see what risk level we're taking compared to the presentation by Paul in a previous few council meetings.
So we haven't established a risks. So the risk scenario that that Paul had explained to council was to determine the level of contribution required to our asset reserves. And so currently, we're not taking assessment of those risks. We're addressing high risk. We're managing our assets to provide the current level of services that we currently provide, and we're not anticipating a reduction in the level of service for projects that we include in the capital plan. Does that address your question, Councillor Young?
Ms. Varela.
Thank you, Your Worship. So for clarification, as I understand the question, is which of those buckets, which was the level of risk tolerance that this budget has been built on? This budget has been built on the lowest level of risk, and council can subsequently advise to adjust that. So we're looking to January 8th, but right now it's built on the lowest risk tolerance.
And then on page 33 of the other booklet, under penalties and interests, I'm just wanting clarification on that because I'm looking at, it's kind of at the top there, penalties and interests. On 2023, the actuals was $1,302,422, and there's a steep jump between 2022 actuals and then what we're budgeting for 2024 and 2025. So I'm just looking for an explanation on that, like a $300,000 increase.
Thank you, Your Worship. So that $300,000 increase represented the increase in anticipated in interest rates that are earned on reserves, and those would, if we earn them, they would be offset by an additional contribution to our reserves that it's earned on, so it would be offset in your expenditures and your transfers to reserves.
Next two questions, Councillor Harrison.
Okay, thank you very much. And yeah, Councillor Jean got one of mine on the three buckets, so kudos, Councillor Young. One thing I was going to raise at the meeting, I literally was in the taxi when they canceled the ferry. That was great. But is on the Seacrest Drive, essentially the slope stabilization project we're doing. And a citizen sent an email to myself, I think to all of council and also to staff, saying what's being done. I sent them a response saying, here's our budget, here's what's being planned out. I didn't hear back. My only question is, are we aware of any expansion that needs to be made in terms of this while we're getting the crews mobilized, while everything's being done, we're doing the work right now in terms of the geotech? Is there something where we have to expand the scope horizontally along that slope at all, or is it basically we've contained the area where there's concerns?
Mr. Dickinson.
We're containing the area where there's the concerns. We're also, what we've started doing though is looking at all properties and all the town properties that are impacted by any slopes in town. And so we're in the process of compiling all those geotechnical reports over the last 50 years to start prioritizing where else we may start seeing problems or we currently are and we're just not aware of it.
Thanks. And I didn't hear back from the citizen after I sent them that email, so I'm assuming they're satisfied with it. Yeah, just in case of, mission creep, that would be something where I could see. We find new information in the process of doing the geotechnical work, and then suddenly the project is an extra 400 or 500,000. Next thing, okay. Public Works and Parks Yard both have expenditures that seem reasonable, but at the same time, lurking in the background is the relocation, if one or both. And I'm just wondering, are we, I know that the timelines to get those processes complete would probably take a very long time, so it's reasonable to do these expenditures, but I'm just curious where that process sort of is, and I see two hands, so.
Ms. Varela.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through to Councillor Harrison. So we did discuss with Council proceeding with a needs assessment. So we're not considering right now, is it one spot, two spots, is it a new spot? We thought we'd back it up and actually say, what are the actual needs that we need as far as area, keeping our staff safe, being able to mobilize efficiently. So first step, needs assessment in 2025.
Just because when we're looking at these buildings, I want to make sure we're not spending a lot of money on new infrastructure essentially at those sites, and then 3 years later, we're moving to a different site or doing some shift somewhere else, and then essentially we have to spend the money all over again 5 years later. But that's two questions, so on to the next.
And in addition to that, we also have an item on the fuel system there at the Public Works, and there was a very good comment from the gallery. What happens if we go somewhere else, or if it doesn't happen? And the comment was that it would be a mobile situation. That's all we need to know, I think, at this time, that whatever we put in place, perhaps Mr. Dickens can elaborate on that. Thank you.
Thank you. In some of the, like you'll see also in the parks where we're talking about storage, dry storage, that would also be, we're not building permanent structure. We're building something that we can relocate. In some cases, it'll be modular, so we can expand on it if we want, or when we move it somewhere else, that we can expand on it. In the case of the fuel, they'll be on skids, so we can take them anywhere, which is great both in a disaster perspective, because then we can move it if we need to for some reason, but also if we relocate our operations department, we can just put it somewhere else.
Thank you. Those are your two questions for Councillor Skipsey.
Okay, I think these ones are fairly simple. And I was corrected. We didn't approve a 0.8, we approved a 1. So we actually approved more, and then that was offset, is my understanding, so.
Ms. Varela?
Thank you, Your Worship. So it was with regards to scoping sheet 25 HW03, request for increased service from the Parks Department. So it was moved and seconded that the Committee of the Whole recommends to Council that the initiative titled Request for Increased Service from the Parks Department be implemented with the addition of 1.0 FTE in the Parks Department beginning in fiscal 2025 to facilitate provision of additional service requests. That was subsequently reduced by staff to 0.8 once Council had decided to drop off a pump track at Crystalton Park. So we went back, looked at the service level, reduced the hours. So instead of that 1.0 FTE, we've reduced our ask to 0.8. The other one to meet the existing service levels is 1.2 FTE. So the Parks Department, new and existing service levels, we're asking for 2.0 FTE in total. Thank you, Your Worship.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so at the December 11th meeting, I do plan to challenge Council to look at some of those additional services that we're adding to see if we can maybe not go forward with some of them in 2025 in order to reduce some of those costs. But I had a question. On page 30, it talks about debt servicing and payments for the fire hall. My recollection is that that must be coming to an end soon, and I just wanted to clarify if that's in 2025.
I think it's 25, but I'll defer that to Mr. Hare.
So the debt for the fire hall is coming to an end in 2025, and that debt will be used as we purchased a fire truck, which we internally borrowed from the reserve for. So that debt, we've been drawing down the reserve for last year and this year for payments for the fire truck, which are equivalent to the debt servicing for the fire hall. So that will convert to servicing the fire truck debt internally without having to borrow it externally for the fire truck.
Okay. Thank you. And then I guess some of the other things, there'll be lots of times to talk about things that are scheduled in 2028 and 2029 and whatnot, because I would like to learn more about the pond in Hoy Lake or something, and also maybe just challenge us to come up with less expensive solutions for some of these. If our costs have gone up so high, like, is it really necessary to have the 5.2 million for the roundabout? Could we scale that back somewhat? And also maybe the project that's coming forward. I wondered about the project that's coming forward for the 19A paving project, whether that will come before council so we can look at the scope and because I don't remember really getting into the details of that project, knowing exactly what is proposed.
Mr. Dickinson.
If I may, speaking to all those projects, one of the things we've been trying to do for the last couple of years is design 1 year and then give that opportunity to be bringing these designs to council before we tender it and go to build it, because what we do is a cost savings process as we review these. Because when we hire a consultant and we ask them to design something, they use our standards and our master plans. And in some cases, those are very old. And in other cases, something that we could have done 15 years ago for $1 million now is $5 million. So we want to revisit those standards and those master plans in the context of what we can afford and also how we can still meet the intent of the original project, but look at how we would do it in today's dollars and today's standards. So I say that because all those projects you've mentioned are in further years, so we definitely will be bringing those back to council. And even the most recent one in front of KSS, where the original intent was really to start off was just 2 additional pedestrian crossings with islands and flashing beacons for pedestrians to activate, which we could do for $100,000. So that's great. And then as we looked at it and looked at the grant and talked to the transportation engineer, then we end up with this well, similar to Memorial, where it is near to the core, it is connected to Memorial. Wouldn't we want, based on our master plans, a complete street? So that's curb, gutter, sidewalk, street trees, a whole bunch of lighting, et cetera, et cetera. And so, boom, we have a $1.9 million project. So there is still years for us to still revisit these, and we will be refining our process so that in future years, as you see a project in year 5, it won't be sticker shock, because we'll have already been on that process to go, no, it would be $5 million, but we've looked at this master plan and now we can do it for $2 or $1.5 million.
So standards make a big difference, expectations, and I've heard using the design-build procedure may also change the price. Thank you. Councillor Van der Valk.
Thank you. I just would like to ask for information based on a question that we received from a resident. So, Town of Qualicum Beach Financial Plans, bylaw number 789, 2024 stated that the town will continue to review the portion of revenue received from user fees and charges to determine whether the user fee component could be increased to lessen the requirement for property taxation. I'm just wondering if this has been done. Have we done anything like that?
Thank you. Mr. Hare?
So typically, user fees that can be reviewed or that can be in other municipalities that can offset property taxation come in the recreation area. We do not manage the recreation area here. The recreation programming is managed through the RDN, and those fees are set by the RDN. So we don't have a lot of discretionary fees in our budget that would go to offset the property taxation pressure, other than water and sewer, and those are standalone utilities.
I don't have any other questions at this point. Thank you.
User fees, airport. Is it possible to have some kind of user fee for people that use the airport? Whether it's for practicing, touch and go. It creates a lot of noise and a lot of complaints. And are we getting anything for accommodating that? Because I think the airport is important, but so is the quality of life for the people that have to live with the result. And I think we can do better. And I wonder if, through the bylaw, we can charge more for people flying in and out of the airport or people who use our facilities there. Ms. Varela.
Thank you, Your Worship. So that is a complicated piece, but staff has been tasked with doing that bylaw review. You also have a master/business plan, I think, which would be part of that puzzle. And I think that's anticipated for 2026. I think we put that one. So bylaw is 2025, and then a master plan is in an outer year subject to receiving a grant. So again, council could advance that in a subsequent year if you'd like to. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Young.
Going back to user fees, again, on page 33 of the bigger package on consolidated summary, we have rental and leases. They seem to maintain a certain line. They're not increasing, and I would think that with the cost of living and everything, rental and leases, we should be getting a bigger revenue. Also on water revenue, the same. I would think that maybe we should be charging more for water so that there is more effort made in water conservation, because that's very necessary. Yeah, so is there any comments about getting more money on our leases or possibly upping the cost of water?
Thank you. Ms. Varela.
Thank you, Your Worship. So that is considered when those leases or agreements come due. We do assess, is that fee appropriate? And ultimately, council enters into that lease. So it is a governance decision. And I will pass the water revenue discussion over because that's a more complicated issue of water rates that council also sets.
So water user fees are comprised of user rates and a parcel tax. And parcel tax is established by bylaw. And the user rates, so typically our parcel tax is going towards our asset management reserve. That's how it was designed to cover our contribution to the management of assets. And our user fee is based on the costs incurred in the utility. So we haven't adjusted our water rate user fees in the last 2 years. But again, adjusting water fees to promote conservation is quite a complex issue. And as you go to a large part of our fees is fixed. So we have a fixed component and a variable component. And as you play with that variable component, you also have to balance the uncertainty of being able to raise the revenue to cover your utility. So there have been situations where municipalities have increased their water rates with the goal of conservation, and they in fact have done the opposite. They've basically not been able to generate, they've increased the risk of generating the revenue to cover their fixed expenses. So you've got to balance that portion of fixed charges with your variable charges to ensure that you're recovering the costs of operating your utility. So it's quite a complex subject, and definitely, I mean, something we can look into in the future in terms of the balance between the variable portion and the fixed portion.
Thank you. And also on the same page on the consolidated summary, there is a line for strategic initiatives, and is budgeted for $637,000 for 2024, yet for 2025, we've got a budget of $946,000. The $300,000 increase, is that like for engaging in consultants, or what is strategic initiatives?
So the 946 is based on the initiatives that the Committee of the Whole is recommending be approved to council for the 2025 budget. And if you look on an earlier page in the budget book, there is a listing of all of those initiatives in the strategic initiatives section. I believe that's on pages 13 to 19. So if you look on page 19, you'll have a list of all of the strategic initiatives that make up the total of that budget.
Okay. Back to Councillor Harrison.
Thank you very much. So on slide 57 of today's slide deck, and I'll just take a second, it talks about the bus garage planning process. And I'm just thinking that since we have a public statement about Qualicum Commons, and who knows what the outcome is, that's in the school board's hands, not ours. But if we were successful in that, would that change the planning process and the scope of it in any way? Or is this something we have to start thinking about? If we are successful there, then what is the next step? Because I'm pretty sure we're going to want to do some public outreach if we are successful.
Mr. Seals.
Thank you. Through the chair to Councillor Harrison. So there is $1 million allocated in the budget for next year, and that money came from the sale of Naked Naturals. And at that time, council indicated that money would be used for amenities on the bus garage site or nearby. So there is some flexibility. So retaining that allocation in the budget for next year is somewhat of a placeholder because there are still mysteries in terms of what the area holds and the timing. So at this time, it's certainly recommended to maintain that allocation right now. But in answer to your question, depending on what decisions the school district makes or what Naked Naturals makes, that could very well affect the timing. And if that were to change, we would be coming back to council with more clarity.
And second thing is just sort of a point. I know the Village Way 19A roundabout in our current estimation is about 5.3 million. I think when I started, it was either 2.1 or 2.8 was the cost at the time. And we were looking for a grant for about like 75, 80% of the total project cost. But when people are looking at some of the things we're investing in, I just want to point out that I don't expect costs for large projects to go down. The French Creek Pollution Control Center is RDN, but when I started, it was supposed to be about 34 million. Now it's close to 100. So sometimes there is merit to actually investing now, and with interest rates getting a little bit better, there's actually a stronger argument that, you know, when people are looking at these big tax increases, just don't do a bunch of things, they'll get so much better. You usually just kick the can down the road and have to spend more later anyways. So just an observation. And that's 2.
Thank you. And as we talked earlier, maybe we can advance the project by having a different approach, either with standards or design-build process. Thank you. Council. Oh, sorry, Ms. Varela.
I just heard design build twice, so I thought I could turn to staff with your permission to actually say, what kind of projects is design build appropriate for? How would we see that used in the municipality?
Thank you. The design build, like, there's several different ways that you can go through procurement and have something designed and then built. And typically what we do in the municipal world for roads, roundabouts, and that is we actually go out, we hire an engineer who designs it, and then they tender it on our behalf, and we hire a contractor. The reason we do that for things like roundabouts, roads, and frankly, water mains, and most of what we build is because the regulations and standards are so prescriptive that design-build processes don't get you the cost savings you would want. Design-build processes where you hire basically a team and you say, like, bridges are great, buildings are great, treatment plants are great, because what you do is you say, this is, for instance, we want this building, we want this square footage, and this is the purpose. And then they go away at the designer and the contractor, and I've been a part of one of those teams before, and the amount of innovation you can have in that room, just thinking about, well, let's use a different, doorstop or all kinds of different things, different door handles, where we went from $400 a door handle down to the usual 60. That type of conversation, because you're in the room with the designer and the person who's going to procure or purchase the materials. And so with a roundabout, however, is you have to have a certain size for different vehicles, be it for semi-trucks, if it is, for instance, on this particular one, because semi-trucks do go through there, or if you're looking at a bridge, you can just basically say, we need this size of vehicle with this weight. And for instance, when we were in Okotoks on a bridge, we had 2 bridges being built. One we did design build, and one we had designed and then tendered. The design tender one was twice the price and was half of what council was looking for. It was just looked horrible, whereas the one where they actually worked with a designer and a contractor was just a much better looking bridge. And it was half the price, literally. And so we look at all these infrastructure projects we have, and we try to look at how we can design them better or design build them or a different procurement process. But unfortunately, many of the things we do is so prescriptive. It has to be a 6-inch or 8-inch water main, and that's where it has to go. There's no availability to work with a contractor and save monies. But we do, through our consultant and ourselves, we do meet with contractors during the tender process and look for different materials or different ways of doing things. And Crescent Road is a great example where through the tender process, the contractor was able, we had a live sewer main, and typically you would remove the sewer main and pump around. But the risk is what if the pump goes down? What if the pump isn't big enough? All these different risks, and then it goes into the creek. Whereas they said, well, what we're going to do is design this cantilevered system with wires. They contracted a subcontractor out of Victoria, and they maintained the live sewer main throughout the whole project, which when I heard this, I'm like, that is an amazing idea. Like, how did you think of this? And so that's what we're promoting more with our tender processes. So we're getting there is what I'm trying to say.
And what I was trying to get at, when you look at the roundabout at the bottom of Church Road, right behind Wembley Mall, I don't think that one was 5.2 million, but it takes B-train trucks. So there must be some flexibility there. All right, who was the last question? Councillor Skipsey.
Okay, I have a couple ones, and then I'm almost done, I think. So the next one, there was talk about culverts and people infilling and whatnot. So in the past, the town has used swales, and I'm just wondering if there's opportunities to reduce moving rainwater through the encouraging the use of swales and whatnot. And given the more intense rain that we are seeing, although I did see on the news that Qualicum Beach has only gotten half of our annual rainfall this year, but that would the swales meet the needs of the rainfall? Because certainly other communities are looking at getting rid of culverts and curbs and gutters in favor of letting the water just sink in.
Are you picking up right where your dad left off? And we also used to go to a conference, and it was called Curbs Are Evil. Yeah. So yeah, there is a kind of a feeling that maybe we'll leave it more natural, but I'll leave it at Mr. Dickinson.
When we pursue, implement our master drainage plan, part of that process will be looking at what both developers can do as they're rebuilding properties, but also what existing property owners can do to help themselves. And so that is a big thing with rain gardens, either on a private property, especially if you have sands where it can just drain into the ground. And if someone's managing that, then because normally in a rain garden you'll have vegetation and that kind of die and it plugs up the bottom. All you have to do is scrape that off every couple of years and it'll keep draining into the ground. So, but somebody has to maintain that. And similar to our swales, where we have swales in many parts of our town, they're great. We shouldn't be putting in a pipe if we don't have to. It just helps mimic the natural water cycle by water going into the ground, and then 6 weeks or 6 months later it gets to the creek. It's nice and cold and the fish love it. So why would we remove that, put in a pipe and shoot it to the ocean as quick as possible? So that'll be all wrapped into that master drainage plan, is looking at all the different opportunities we can to help ourselves. And some of that may be in some of these ditches, looking at how they're filling up and how quickly they're filling up, and whether it's people having hedges too close to them and so all that debris is going in there and plugging it, or whether we just have to have, in some instances, just a larger operational budget to go in and clean them out more frequently. We'll be looking at all of these things.
Thank you. Ms. Varela.
And as mentioned earlier, a big piece of this puzzle is going to be dealing with the swales that have been filled in without permit or without process or without inspection, because they are creating drainage problems. So that's a precursor for things to come.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, my second question is around transfers from reserves. So when on page 32, when we look at the consolidated summary, in past years, it's been 1.2 million, 2 million, 2.7, and now this year, almost 10 million, next year, 7.5 million. So I'm just wondering how much we're depleting our reserves, or where do I find the summary of what's in our reserves?
Mr. Hare.
So the summary of your reserves will be included in the complete budget book. We just didn't have the time to include it in the condensed version, but you definitely are depleting your reserves over time due to the increased requirements for funding replacement in assets and the large investments that are required over the year, and the fact that we're putting in much less into our, as I'd mentioned on an earlier slide, we're putting about 1.3 million into our reserves. However, the required or the assumed annual contribution is about 5.2 million. So really, we're putting 4 million less than we should be, but we're drawing from our reserves at a larger rate than we're putting into because of the large amount of infrastructure that's coming up for renewal.
Councilor Vandervalk.
Thank you. I just had, again, another question that was sent to Mayor and Council and the town regarding the plans to buy a new garbage truck, a little garbage truck we needed to replace. We have two that are not running well, and plans are to buy a new one. And just the idea of could we look at something other than an internal combustion engine truck, since we're trying to, one of our initiatives is to electrify our fleet as much as possible. So I'm just wondering if that's been taken into consideration.
Thank you. Mr. Dickinson.
Thank you. Whenever we're replacing any of our vehicles, we are looking at either that hybrid as a step towards or an electrical option. When we get to certain size vehicles, it is very challenging to find an electric vehicle that'll suit our needs. And so what we're looking at right now is in a lot of instances, is it out there? Is it cost comparative? And we're looking at life cycle cost, not just the purchase cost, but also who has already done this? Because there's some challenges, especially with operational necessities. We don't want to be the first and then find out it was a terrible idea, for instance. So we are definitely looking at this with each of our purchases and seeing what is out there and who has done it. And as well as with some of these companies selling them, like Ford, for instance, is ensuring that that line of vehicle is going to be continuing in the future, or that they're going to support the continued maintenance of that vehicle into the future.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I don't have anything else right now. Thank you.
One of my questions is the generator at the airport. I wonder if our manager could explain the need, it sounds like it's urgent, for a generator at the airport. Mr. Kevin.
Thank you, Your Worship. The generator at the airport. So the generator is considered a critical piece of infrastructure, and I can explain why. When we lose hydropower at the airport, we don't have lighting. For an example, there's no runway lighting. There's no fuel. We cannot sell fuel. So when we have no runway lighting, in poor weather conditions and in darkness, aircraft cannot land or depart. So last week, for an example, during the cyclone bomb that we experienced last Tuesday, our commercial carrier could not return from Vancouver with 5 passengers, for an example, because the power was out at the airport and there was no runway lighting. Those 5 passengers had to stay in Vancouver overnight. That's one example. Another good example would be when we lose power under those conditions, such as nighttime or poor weather conditions, we will not be able to receive medevacs into the community, which is really critical for this community. This year, BC Ambulance reports that we've had 5 medevacs that have come in and out of the community. Last week, I had a call from the dispatch center from BC Health Services, for an example, and they asked me if we had fuel services because they were filing a flight plan out of Port McNeill to Victoria. And as part of that flight plan, the helicopter had to take on fuel at Qualicum Beach. So I waited for that helicopter. They did land, and I ensured that we had fuel like I had told them. But had we have lost power during that flight, they would have landed and I wouldn't have been able to provide them with fuel. So it is a critical piece of infrastructure, Your Worship. You know, we are seeing with climate change, we are seeing these storms more frequent. We're seeing them much more intense. We were very fortunate, as we all know, last Tuesday, that that particular event was offshore. Had it been over Vancouver Island, it could have been much worse, as you know, it was hurricane force winds. So yes, it is a critical piece of infrastructure, and this is why we're recommending to council that it be purchased in 2025.
I think going back to the EV electrified garbage truck, I think that same resident mentioned something in Comox that they did have, was it 4 or something, electric garbage trucks already? So we could check in with Comox to see how that is working for them.
Ms. Varela.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I just wanted to remind council and the community that we are working on a fleet electrification policy, and we anticipate that being presented to council in Q1 of 2025.
Thank you. Second question?
Okay, on page 19 of our bigger booklet on strategic initiatives details, there is 50,000 allotted for how to achieve affordable market housing or ways to achieve affordable market housing. I'd like to be enlightened as to what that money would cover.
Mr. Steels.
Thank you. So this was a strategic initiative considered by council, and this is, I consider it to be a complement to the overall OCP review. OCP review is very high level. How are we addressing the demand for housing over the next 5-20 years? The Affordable Market Housing Initiative was proposed at to be a very detailed, practical review of how we could achieve market housing in the community that is affordable. So for example, options might be things like cooperative developments or maybe tiny homes or some alternate form of housing. So it wouldn't be at the high policy level. It would be a kind of a practical economic analysis based proposal to advance market housing that is affordable.
Okay, to add to that, I noticed that on our town-owned lands, the Baptist Church is one of our properties, and I'm wondering, Scott Harrison, Councillor Harrison and I belong to the Oceanside Non-Market Housing Committee, and possibly if that church that is owned by the town, it is about 30 years old, I believe, that it could be considered for non-market housing build.
I think the church is about 100 years old, actually. Anyway, Ms. Varela.
Thank you, Your Worship. For the benefit of council and the public, the scoping sheet 24HS04, Strategies for Ways to Achieve Affordable Market Housing. The Committee of the Whole did recommend to council that this initiative be undertaken in conjunction with the OCP, Option 2, Housing Focused OCP. And further, that the timeline and budget for the initiative is advanced from 2027 to 2025 in the financial plan. So Committee of the Whole has given direction to staff to date. Of course, that can always be changed.
Okay.
Sorry, so just trying to save a couple pennies here and there, 50,000, I'm thinking that we could try to save that because we know that is a given to get affordable or non-market housing. It's not the developers on provincial and government and federal funding, or that we allow for carriage lanes and we can get templates that will make it easier and more affordable for our residents, or do co-ops. But I just think to spend that extra $50,000 is reviewing something that we already know.
Mr. Sales, you mentioned earlier about our OCP. Could that be, is that part of our OCP review when you talk about these kind of suggestions?
Sure. The OCP review is fairly high level, so there is a lot of overlap between these initiatives. So I do anticipate there'll be some economy of scale or cost benefit of doing them both in conjunction, but they're not the same thing, and that the OCP is more of a policy review. The market housing initiative is more of an on the ground practical analysis of how we can actually make change. So they are complementary but distinct.
Thank you. Councillor Harrison.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm just going to be really blunt. I can save you $50,000. You're going to need an injection of funding from a higher level of government or from individual citizens. So at Housing Central, that was why I was away. There was one session on where to actually find alternative funding sources. There's also another session on mixed income projects. This is probably the closest two things that align with it. The mixed income projects, the affordability was contingent on getting BC Housing funding or CMHC funding, full stop. And it's a company, and that's all they do. There are some purpose-driven investment companies. There was one, oh gosh, they're brand new, and I've forgotten their name, sorry. I'll have to ask BCMPHA for their slide deck. But there are some companies that do basically impact investing, but they would probably be looking at a larger project in terms of scale. So it's gonna come back to, do you get funding for it or not? Co-ops, same thing. Federal government announced just over $1 billion in July, but that's basically for co-ops who are ready to build, not for folks who are just trying to go down the road. And the other thing for fleet electrification, when we had our public works open house, I did speak to our staff, the actual mechanics who fix our trucks, and they said flat out, don't do electric, do hybrid. You'll be on electricity 95% of the time, but that 5% of the time you're on gas is when there's a huge dump of snow and you have to be operating 24/7. And as Mr. Dickinson mentioned, some of the bigger trucks don't exist yet. So I remember recently I was looking at Ford. F-150s, those are available in electric, that's the Lightning. There's nothing for the 250, 350 chassis. This is probably even more specialized than that. So I don't think it's even available yet, unless it's like a very small company that's boutique, and that's exactly what they do. But then, yeah, you have cost escalation, and then will they be around in 5 years? Who knows? Yeah, no, I trust staff on that. Technically, those are two comments, but that's two things, so I should probably cede to Councillor Skipsey.
Thank you. Councillor Skipsey. Councillor Vanderbock.
I don't have anything further right now. Thank you.
Councillor Young.
Okay, on page 57 of the bigger package on solid waste, I know that we provide a cardboard recycling. Can we also supply a plastic bin for recycling, or recycling plastic?
I think we can supply anything and willing to pay for it. We're looking at cost reductions, not ask for more. So, Mr. Diggins.
If I may, right now what we're looking at actually with the RDN having the three different, the compost, the recycling, and the landfill pickup is working with our own facilities as well as the different commercial industries in town about how we're going to do that. Because for us, for instance, for our own facilities, we'll be looking at a commercial pickup and the potential cost of that. Because the RDN won't be picking these things up for us. We'll be having to have somebody else pick it up and then deliver it to their transfer station. So it is something ongoing in the future, and that has to be by June 1st, I believe, of 2025.
Thank you. Anything else?
Yes, and then on the bigger booklet on page 58 regarding the airport, I noticed that on administration, there is no costing listed.
Mr. Hare?
I'll have to get back to you with that. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. Shall we ask, since there are only 2 people left in the gallery, I don't want to lose them all before we have some public input. So perhaps we could ask whoever is left and wants to speak first. Who would like to go first? Go ahead, Joyce.
Just a question about East Village Phase 3. In Mr. Hare's presentation on a slide, which I don't have a
Please address the
copy of.
chair.
Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Hare had a slide that had a line item of East Village Phase 3, and he didn't highlight about it, and I can't find it in my package, so I'm just curious about what that was.
Thank you. Councillor, Mr. Sales.
Thank you. East Village Phase 3 is intended to complete the beautification works on the east side. So across from Naked Naturals, you notice there's no sidewalk there. So at the time that that property develops, whenever that happens to be, the remainder of the work would be undertaken. And so it also includes some provision for improvements through Clock Tower Square as well.
Thank you. Would you like to speak to us? No?
Marie Noel, I live in Qualicum Beach. I've got lots of questions, of course. I'd like to start with slide number 11, page number 11, out of the actual budget. This is the organizational chart. I just note on this chart that there's been quite a few changes from last year's, and I wanted to understand that this is actually the full complement of staff currently, as proposed. Am I correct in that assumption?
Mr. Hare.
Your Worship, through you, this is the full complement, plus it includes any proposed FTEs in it as well. So
right.
The proposed FTEs in the budget are updated and included in this chart.
Okay, great. So last year when we showed the airport staff, we also had a deputy airport manager and we had a parks person. Are they now in the parks area?
Who would like to speak to that?
Your Worship, it would assist me if we actually had both last year's org chart up and this year's, so that I don't think staff can do that. So the airport, right away I see that we're missing the deputy off there. So if we could just flag that staff will bring back an analysis on December 11th, because I think that would be useful for both the council and the community to see the changes from last year. And again, this should have a draft because council hasn't made these decisions. So while I can see the addition of a human resources, it appears, I think we're missing the deputy. So I thank the member of the public for bringing this to staff's attention, and I think a comparison would be useful for the next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Please proceed.
Great. Can we go to page 29? Is the workplace planning. And I notice here that we have increased the number of staff. And there's a couple of things that I want to point out here. And it looks to me like from 21 to 25, we've increased staff over that 4-year period by 17.8 FTE in a 4-year period. It represents 30%. It's a significant increase to staff versus the increase to population. And we still use many consultants, as many as we've been using in the past, from what I can tell. So I'm not saying that this isn't the number of people we need. I just think we need to be cognizant that when we put them on here, they're on here permanently. There are a few that have been identified as coming on just as a term or a contract position, but those positions always seem to convert to permanent. I haven't seen any actually go away at any point.
Let me ask staff about that. That seems like a pretty good point to raise. Thank you. Ms. Varela?
Again, thank you for allowing staff to speak to this, Your Worship. So those decisions are brought back to council. So when council does approve a term position, we can't convert that without actually coming back to you for decision. So I believe we saw that in a couple positions over the last year that they were term. We brought them back to council and council has converted. So I know one of them was the HR position. So, but again, those don't just happen. Those are brought back to council for decision making.
I'd like to see if we can do an analysis on the number of new positions, like 17 positions. That's significant. Can we get a bit of an analysis, not a bit, an analysis of who these 17 positions are, if that is correct? We don't need it now, but bring it back to a future meeting. Thank you. Go ahead.
I just want to point out that actually that page does tell you which department they've been added to, so the analysis has actually been done. It's just an observation that over time, we're still adding lots of extra people. And this is a cost that the taxpayer continues to pay forever. So we talk about 10% increase, but our base point keeps going up every time. So.
Thank you.
Okay. Could we move to page 40, please? Page 40 is the human resources component of staffing. And as I understand it correctly, we are now going to have a permanent staff of 3 people in HR, including 1 at a director level.
Ms. Vrilla?
Thank you for the opportunity to clarify, Your Worship. We do have 2 FTE in this department, and we're asking council for a 2-year term position. So it's 2 full-time positions and a term at this time.
So two full-time plus a term, and the term is based to be out of contingency or strategic initiatives, I'm not sure which fund it was, and then it's intended to revert to taxation?
Would you like to answer the question, Mr. Hare?
Yes, Your Worship. So that one position is funded through accumulated surplus. And again, it would not revert to taxation, as our CAO had mentioned, unless council were to approve it as a permanent FTE in the future.
Thank you.
Okay. Can we talk a little bit about that contributed surplus and also other funds that we use? I've heard capacity planning as a source of funding on that green sheet that we just saw a few minutes ago. I've never seen that before in terms of a designated reserve or anything. So when do we use that fund? When do we use our gas tax fund? When do we use contributed surplus? When do we use taxpayer money of this year? Is there a strategy behind it?
Ms. Vrilla.
Thank you, Your Worship. It is quite detailed in the PowerPoint presentation. Staff really tried to break out where the funding sources were. There were 2 standalone slides just for particular sources that we've received queries on about how that budget was being allocated. So again, if council wishes additional clarification, we're happy to bring that back, or if the director would like to speak to that, Your Worship.
Thank you. Mr. Hare.
Yeah, we can bring back any further questions, but a couple of clarifications points. The capacity funding was actually funding provided by the provincial government to address the pressures of the November housing announcement for implementation. So when we referred to capacity funding, that's what we were referring to there.
So that's a one-time grant type of funding?
That is correct.
Thank you. Okay. That's that one. Okay, could we go to slide 31, please? 31 is the general fund for property taxation, where you're telling us what the average person, average household is going to pay in the increased taxes based on this projected budget. And I just want to make a couple of points. I said this before, that I live in a very basic house. It's less than 2,000 square feet. It's 20 years old, doesn't have a view. It's on a lane, so I only get half a road, and there's no sidewalks and there's no streetlights. So I worked out my own taxes, and they turn out with this increase, and this is including the RDN, that taxes for next year for me will be $86.59. So it's a big number, it's a big increase. Last year was $78.83, just to give you some perspective. I also looked at the total for the town of Qualicum Beach, the general municipal taxes, just the general portion, over the last 4 years has gone up by 45%. The RDN, including the wastewater addition that we have to pay, has increased over the last 4 years by 57%. The hospital levy has increased over the last 4 years by 336% and has the potential to be more than the general RDN taxes that I pay by the year 2026, just based on the notes they've put in their financial statements as to the raises that they expect to do there. The RDN wastewater increase over 4 years has been 66%, and that expense is expected to double by 2028. So all in, the cumulative taxes that your taxpayers are paying here over the last 4 years is 53% in 4 years. Okay. Next page is page 50, please. Page 50 deals with the emergency program, and I understand that this comes in under planning at this point. What I'm trying to understand is how this fits with what we pay the RDN for this component of emergency planning and just generally where the money goes, because I also pay a component of this in the RDN, and I'm now paying it also here in QB, and I don't really understand the division or what we actually get out of this position.
Mr. Hare.
Thank you. So we were just having a brief discussion because we're both prepared to speak to what the town does for emergency planning, but I'm not familiar with the requisition for the regional district and how that relates. So I think that's one we'd have to look into and come back to you.
I believe the portion that we've got here is the grant-funded portion, and there are other grants that the RDN has applied for as well, perhaps on our behalf. But overall, there's a fair bit of funds going to this, and I don't really understand what we're getting back for it.
Ms. Varela.
Thank you, Your Worship. Staff has discussed that I think there's some interest in what services we contribute or pay for that for the RDN to deliver. And so we'll actually be making a request for them to present on those service levels early in 2025.
Can we move to page 58, which is the airport? Topic dear to my heart. I had also noticed the administration, and I was hoping that this is going to reflect the amount of time spent from people within Town Hall here to help assist managing the airport. These would be people like in finance and in media relations, all the other jobs that are not actually allocated to the airport, but do get a significant amount of workload as a result of the airport. I might be wrong, but that's what I was hoping was going to be.
Ms. Varela.
So that wouldn't be accurate. I think we have that challenge across multiple departments with multiple, myself, for example, a portion of myself is not allocated specifically to the airport. We might have some sharing out in costing, but I believe this administration line will be solely direct staffing, and the director and I can talk about that afterwards.
So the direct staffing is not currently included in the airside expense?
The direct staffing is included in the airside costs, And the administration, there is nothing charged to administration. It was an error in the printing of the book. It should, basically, there's no charges charged to administration, so we should have actually removed that line item in that chart.
Thank you, Your Worship, but it was a very broad category of what staff would be allocated. So I've heard airside is allocated, but then I also heard the idea of communications and other pieces like that. So I don't think it will fully capture, but perhaps the director can confirm or correct.
So airside is actually direct charges, or direct salary charges are charged to the airside line item to clarify. And then any time that is spent by staff, we don't allocate wages to the airport, but direct time spent working on the airport is coded to the airport and charged there. So there is no allocation of wages to the airport per se when we take a look at our actual costs.
And that isn't unique to the airport, I think, Your Worship. I think that we don't allocate a specific amount of communication to a single department other than corporate services, I believe. So there's nuances to the question. So airside, yes. Other aspects in supporting the airport or other portfolios within the organization, that's just what we do.
Sorry, Mr. Sales.
And if I could interject, I know you're eagerly awaiting clarification on the emergency services. So that portion that the town funds regionally is for the 911 service. So the services that the town provides locally through our emergency program, which is in our budget, is distinct from what they offer.
Thank you. Also on this particular slide, the transfer from reserves is showing up in the revenue line. And I realize that we're putting it there so that we have a balanced budget. But transfer from reserves presumably is from the town's reserves, and it's not funds generated at the airport. Am I correct?
That is correct. That 130 allocation is from the Strategic Initiatives Reserve to fund the one-time project that the airport manager had spoken about earlier.
Okay. So what's missing off this slide compared to last year is the losses. When I look at this and I take the total revenue and the total expenses, we're still losing $235,000 on the day-to-day operations of the airport without allocating all of the staff time in that department. Correct?
Ms. Marilla.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I think this is the nuance between operating a business and operating a local government. So the local government operates to multiple bottom lines, quality of life, safety, things like that. It's not purely a break even. So again, things like recreation, parks, trails, the civic center, the community hall, a lot of the leases that you have societies run, things like that, those aren't a for-profit business. So I don't think the airport is unique in that. I think, again, it is a community amenity. You know, your roads, your water, you're a service provider body, and I think it's distinct from a business from local government, if that helps.
Yeah, so I'd just like to make the point that the object here is not to, and I keep saying this, my goal is not to shut down the airport. It's to find a better way to fund it so that the people who live in Qualicum are not the only people paying for it. And in order to achieve that, we need to have good data. So I'm looking for as much information out there as to what we're really spending as a town to keep the airport running.
And you're absolutely right that the airport serves a lot more than Qualicum Beach. But when they've been receiving this facility, the amenity and the services for free, it's pretty hard to say you need to contribute to the airport, which would only be fair. If we're talking equal services for everybody, then equal pay should also apply. We continue to impress on the area residents, not just Qualicum Beach, that the airport is there for everybody, but not everybody pays. And that's a problem. And I haven't found a way to convince other board members that they should really contribute to this, because I know from Parksville, several times when we used to have a Airport Appreciation Day, that the mayor of Parksville came and said, this is great. He just spoke with a party that was happening at Taidamara. And the only reason why they called everybody over from the mainland was because they had an airport here. And so it benefits Parksville, Taidamara businesses, but no support other than a landing fee. And I'm not even sure how at that time we charge that. But we need to look at user fees, as I mentioned earlier. User fee for airport users, I think, is a fair place to start. Thank you. Councilor, Ms. Varela.
Thank you, Worship. So staff are excited about the direction that Committee of the Whole has given to date about the bylaw review to look at reducing that funding gap, as well as highlighting the master plan / business plan in 2026, because that really is the tool that would allow us to advance discussions about the possibility of the airport being acknowledged as a regional amenity. So again, staff are excited to explore ways to reduce that funding gap. So thank you.
So if my math is correct, we have 235,000 as an operating loss. We have 130,000 taken out of town reserves to pay for the one-time operating project, being the runway survey and tree management. We have $145,000 taken from the asset replacement reserve to cover CapEx that's not covered by grants this year. So I'm still coming out to $510,000 a year that QB taxpayers are contributing to the airport to keep it running, and that works out to $1,397 a day. Important to note is that the town is also choosing to use $160,000 of the money that is coming from Community Works Fund. I think that's our gas tax, if I remember right. But that money is actually given to the town to use for whatever it wants, not just the airport. It could have been used in other areas. So I haven't included that in my numbers because it's your decision whether you use it for the airport or not. Total resources used to fund the QB Airport in 2025 is going to be $5,125,000, which is over $14,000 in taxpayer-funded monies. And I'm not saying QB, I'm saying between the federal, the provincial, and QB. $14,000 a day is what it works out to. And I ask you to take that into context with the amount of user contribution we get. User contribution is our leases, it's our landing fees, it's the profit we make on gas. So that total amount of user contribution is $153,000. So we're spending $5.125 million this year, and we're getting back from the people who actually use the airport on a regular basis, we're getting $153,000. I really think the town needs to explore all options to reduce the burden overall, not just to QB. That's all I have for today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for staying with us so long and waiting for your turn to speak. Appreciate that. So, is there anything from council we'd like to pursue? Ready to adjourn? No. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. So one thing, just speaking of HR, which was not in the budget or the slide deck, which council is aware of, is the escalation in workers' compensation funds that we have to basically, this is a thou shalt pay. We don't have a choice. We have to pay this. But it's basically quadrupled in about 4 years, if my recollection is correct. And it's now at 350, 360, I think, is somewhere in that. So in terms of HR, the work, one of the reasons we're getting more folks for HR is that if we don't start containing that escalation, it gets to a very scary number very fast. So it's something that I don't recall. If it was in the thing, I missed it. I did a word search, I didn't see it. I looked, I missed it, and then my honest apologies if I missed it. But I just think that's a crucial piece of information for the public too, when we look at some of these hiring decisions. And I don't know if staff want to speak to it or not, because it's essentially a reiteration of a conversation we've had before. But sorry, I see Ms. Varela's hand is up. Sorry.
Ms. Varela.
Thank you, Worship. So I believe that was included in workforce planning, and we will break that out for the December 11th report.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just my eyes, just when I saw that number, it's gone from 90,000 or around there about 4 or 5 years ago to 360 plus. That's a huge increase, and that basically pays for an FTE all on its own, and then some, arguably almost two. Next was FOIs. So at Housing Central, I spent a lot of time with the mayor of Courtenay, Mayor Wells, and when I told him how many FOIs we get as a community, 1/4 the size of Courtenay, maybe less, his eyes noticeably widened. Really? So I know we discussed this in the past informally when we first got a slide deck, and I think it was very early in the budget process, and staff sort of showed, here's how many FOIs we get. And it is really an outlier for a small community. We are an outlier for that. I'm not saying we do anything. I'm just wondering if maybe one day that's something we should talk about, because it does have an administrative cost at the end of the day. Staff do have to fill that in. So I'm just wondering if maybe, staff want to say just 2 seconds, if that's a report like months from now, I know. But something we might want to look at is how can we try to work with the public to reduce that? Is it improving our website? Is it reminding people that, please don't abuse FOI process for something you can, that has a press release? Or, I'm not sure the way we can address that, because I honestly don't have a simple silver bullet.
Ms. Svensson.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. So the FOI number really is something that I think it's the demographic of our community, because the lion's share of our FOIs for this year anyways were through real estate companies for property purchases. So because we have a lot of turnover with housing, I would say probably 80% of this year's, we can get you a proper number, but I would guess to say it's about 80% are from realtors doing due diligence for their clients. So it's something we can't avoid. There's the Act sets out what can be routinely releasable and what requires freedom of information request. And most homeowners now are doing their extra due diligence and are wanting all the documentation before they purchase a home.
Thank you very much. That's news to me. If there's not much we can do about it, there's not much we can do about it. I just wish there's some way we could sit down with realtors and say, is there a way they can look at some of the records if they're looking for, the things that are on title. I'm sorry, I got very little sleep last night, like 2 or 3 hours, so my mind is not as sharp as it should be. But if that is just what it is what it is. But if there's anything staff think could actually address that and reduce that workload, that would be lovely to hear in the future. But if there's really nothing, then I guess that's just what it is. Sorry, that's 2. I know if several people said they're done, so I'll wait to see if anyone else.
You're doing all right on 2 or 3 hours of sleep, so.
Just following up on the FOIs, if it is realtors, do they pay a fee for that?
It's the client putting their request in, not the actual realtor. So no, they don't pay a fee. So if you were purchasing a home, you would put the FOI request in, but it's at the advice of the realtor to do your due diligence, to have your plot plan, your survey, any inspections. So no, there's no fee. They pay for photocopying, but it's very minimal. There's no revenue generated by it.
So I know in the city of Vancouver, if you need information about a property, you pay fees for it. So that might be something that could generate some revenue if we're doing it for free, essentially.
Thank you. Ms. Varela.
Yeah, it's worth noting that legislation only allows the local government to charge after 3 hours, I believe it is. So if you spend more than 3 hours on a file, then we charge hourly after that.
Yeah, and Vancouver has their own charter, so they can do more than what we could do. Councillor Young.
Okay, just a couple more, I swear. One point about Community Works, it's great to raise the fact that that is a funding source, and I agree. I think we're going to get a more detailed document in the future, but looking at how much money is coming in for Community Works, how's it being allocated, it's sort of right now it's split up in like 5 different places in that budget, but there are also limitations set by the federal government through UBCM as to what we can spend it on. So just in case, I know Ms. Noel probably knows this already, but just for the public who might be watching, both of you online, there are things you can't do, so we couldn't do operational stuff with Community Works funds, much as we might like to. Other thing about staffing that was mentioned, how there's been significant increase. I've only been here about 6 years. I would strongly argue in their previous term, we were understaffed. And then the pandemic hit, and instead of trying to staff up At that point, it was just all hands on deck. Oh my gosh, we're dealing with a pandemic. How are we getting our crews out when physical distancing prevents 2 people being in one truck? Was one thing I remember. Just operationally, it was a nightmare. But I would argue that I know that this increase seems pretty significant, but there are real reasons behind that. And I do think previously our town was getting by with not having enough workers. Bluntly speaking, it's just my view of things operationally. That's technically 2. I think we're almost out for everyone, and I have like 2 things left, and that's it.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a big number, 17, and I know they're all allocated in different areas, but perhaps we could look at and see what the workload, how the workload increased that required that many more people, not just in that area. Thank you. Councillor Young.
Just one other thing. There is an item that says tennis courts resurfacing for $60,000. Is that like an immediate need or a nice to have?
Dickinson.
If I may, that's an immediate need in that the lines are so faded that at some point it becomes a safety issue and an issue where they can't play appropriately.
Okay. This is not something I'm advancing. This is something I'm just noting. When we're looking at revenue, the City of Vancouver, their Parks Board, while it still exists, have, I think it's 6 golf courses. Per the CBC report that I read ages ago, CBC article rather, that generates $10 million of revenue annually. Currently, Memorial Golf Course generates, I think, the lease is somewhere in the order of 80 to 90,000, something like that. Yeah, 76. So I have no problem with folks in town getting cheap golf. I think that's perfectly fine. It's a lot of people in Qualicum Beach, I think it's like 40% of citizens golf a little bit or frequently. I just want to flag though that it's years out, but I do want to flag that if we're essentially subsidizing those folks from Parksville or the regional district for below market rates, that would be a question we might want to think about, having a conversation with the Memorial Golf Course Board of, it's perfectly fine if folks pay their taxes and one of the benefits is you get slightly cheaper golf. But if you're a resident outside of town, maybe there should be a different rate for membership. So it's sort of tiered based on you pay taxes here or you don't. Again, I don't think that's something we need to follow up on. I'm just flagging that in terms of revenue sources in the future. That's something, if you look at it as about 1.4 million or whatever it is per course, even though some of them are 18 holes, not 9, it's a lot more than 76 or so.
Well, there will be a meeting with the golf course board in the near future, so it's a fair question to ask.
Yeah. And again, I'm not trying to disrupt things for local folks, but I do think we have that fair ask of you're using our facilities. We are subsidizing, like the bridge was $300,000 of the town funds. I don't think you can walk your dog along the bridge without some folks at the golf course looking at you a little. So I think it's fair to say, well, if your taxes aren't going into this, then respectfully you should pay a little bit more. And last one is an awkward moment, just with Satlam Park. I know we had the ballot initiative, but we're also committed to funding it. I'm just making sure there's no conflict there with that.
What issue?
Oh, the ballot initiative in the last election.
The ballot?
Yeah, on the ballot, there was a ballot question regarding that funding for the Satlam Park, for the St. Andrews Lodge building, and the funding for the washroom. I'm just making sure there's no wires getting crossed there. Don't think it was binding, by the way, but I just want to make sure.
We could, Your Worship, we could make a note on December 11th to respond to that question.
Yeah, because I'm not sure actually what you mean, but we'll get to it. Maybe this the time is thinking about all the different fees and charges. So we can have a conversation later and tell me exactly what you're looking for. Thank you. Okay. Is that all for everybody? Councillor Young.
On record management, we have $60,000 plus 1,200 staff hours. Isn't that just kind of something standard that our staff would just do? Why would it be requiring extra costs?
Ms. Varela.
Thank you, Your Worship. That is a significant undertaking, so we want to get our paper files in accordance with the Local Government Management Association, as well as our end drive. So a lot of really important work to be done on that, excuse me, and we do anticipate that can't be done off the side of someone's desk. It's intensive. It was 2 years when we did that in Oak Bay, so big project, and we're going to try to do it in one in Qualicum Beach.
Okay. Sorry, with that, if there's no, Ms. Brunel, go ahead.
May I, Your Worship? I just wanted to extend a huge thank you to Council for being so prepared today. The idea of shifting from a budget that's just miles of Excel sheets, it's frankly very hard for the public to understand, to this level of detail, and seeing the depth of questions asked by both the public and Council today, I'm really excited that people are buying into this budget process. So thank you to Council for your leadership in this. I also wanted to thank both the leadership team as a whole, but especially the Finance Department, the hours, the evenings, the weekends. If you think back to what your budget was in Qualicum Beach 3 years ago, you have made huge strides. So that's amazing governance. I also did want to remind both Council and the public that staff welcomes questions in advance of December 11th. It's the more we can have advance notice, the better it is. You didn't have a lot of time with this condensed budget book, neither did the public, so we were happy to be on the hot seat today, but if we can be more prepared for December 11th, we'd welcome that opportunity. And a reminder for Council that Monday, December 2nd at 10 a.m. is your cutoff for any notice of motion deadlines for December 11th, if you'd like to bring those forward. So we're looking forward to December 11th, and again, thank you for your leadership.
Thank you. And I know that the manager of financial services is in the back, so a lot of paperwork goes to your office. Thank you, Ms. Khan. And thank you, staff, for being prepared to answer most of these questions. We'll get to the bottom of some of them, especially about the airport one, about the actual cost annually and what we can do to address that. So with that, Council, are you ready to adjourn? Councillor Young? Oh, yeah, I hear so. I take that as a mover. And a second to Councillor Vanderwalk. Discussion. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Thank you. Later today, 2:30, and there'll be lunch provided. Thank you.